My younger brother pried open my bedroom safe, took what he thought was my emergency fund, and blew every cent on designer clothes and electronics. He sat on my mattress, surrounded by shopping bags, waiting for me to fall to my knees and beg for my money back. I did not shed a single tear. I just looked at the empty metal box and smiled. My reaction unnerved him. But the real panic set in 2 minutes later when our father stormed into the room, pale and sweating, demanding to know what happened to the $16,960 he had just placed in that safe, the exact amount he had borrowed from a high-interest lender to pay my brother's overdue college tuition. Welcome back to Silent Vengeance Stories, where the people who take your quiet nature for weakness learn exactly how wrong they are. If you have ever been expected to clean up the messes left behind by the family favorite, you belong here. Let me know where you are listening from in the comments. And hit subscribe because the fallout from this afternoon dismantled my family piece by piece. I am 30 years old and I work as a senior risk analyst for a logistics firm in downtown Seattle. My job is to look at failing structures, identify the bad debt, and cut the losses before they sink the company. It requires a cold eye and a steady hand. I walked into my childhood home on a Tuesday evening after a 12-hour shift. I only lived there because my grandmother needed overnight care and my parents refused to hire a nurse. I stepped into the hallway and noticed my bedroom door was ajar. I pushed the door open. The digital safe I kept in the bottom of my closet sat on the rug. The heavy steel door was warped, pried open with what looked like a crowbar. Liam was sitting at the foot of my bed. He is 24 years old, 4 semesters behind on his degree, and the undisputed golden child of the Thorne family. He leaned back against my pillows with his arms crossed. Spread across my duvet were 3 Gucci shopping bags, a Balenciaga shoebox, and a brand new silver MacBook still wrapped in plastic. He watched my face. He was hungry for a reaction. He wanted the screaming, the crying, the desperate realization that the money I had been saving to buy my own condo was gone. He had always resented my independence. Taking it away was his way of putting me back in his shadow. I looked at the Pried metal hinges of the safe. Then I looked at the luxury items covering my bed. I did not yell. I felt a slow, quiet clarity settle in my chest. 3 months ago, I moved my entire emergency fund out of that safe and into an external high-yield savings account. Liam did not know that. He rarely paid attention to anything that did not directly benefit him, but I knew exactly what was in that safe. I looked at Liam and I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the expression you make when a math problem finally balances out. His smug posture faltered. He uncrossed his arms. He opened his mouth to say something, but the sound of heavy footsteps pounding up the stairs cut him off. Our father, Richard, appeared in the doorway. He was out of breath. His tie was loosened and sweat shined on his forehead. He pushed past me without saying hello and went straight for the closet. When he saw the broken safe on the floor, he froze. He turned to Liam. His eyes darted from the empty metal box to the Gucci bags on the bed. "Where's the envelope?" Richard asked. His voice was hoarse. Liam blinked. "What envelope?" "The brown envelope I put in the safe yesterday morning," Richard said, stepping closer to the bed. "I asked your sister for her code so I could store it for one day. $16,960 in cash." "Liam, the money I pulled from the title lender to cover your tuition balance. The registrar needs it by 500 today or they are dropping your enrollment." I watched the color leave my brother's face. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by a hollow, sinking terror. He looked at the designer clothes. He looked at the laptop. He had not stolen my condo fund. He had stolen his own salvation. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the central air conditioning. Liam's hands began to shake. He had burned down his own future. And I was standing right there, watching the smoke rise. The quiet stretched. 10 seconds felt like an hour. Richard stared at his son. Liam stared at the shiny silver laptop. I leaned against the doorframe and watched the reality of the situation settle over them. The money was gone. The cash Richard had desperately secured to keep his son enrolled in a university he barely attended had been traded for Italian leather and a backlit keyboard. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. My mother, Brenda, appeared behind Richard. She wore her typical afternoon attire, a beige cashmere sweater and pristine slacks, carrying her half-empty wine glass. She looked past my father, her eyes landing on the warped metal door of the safe lying on my rug. Then she saw the shopping bags. Any rational parent would have dropped the glass. Any normal mother would have dragged her 24-year-old son off that bed and demanded a receipt. Brenda did neither. She walked into the room, sidestepped the ruined safe, and turned her gaze directly on me. "Why did you leave your code written down?" she asked. Her tone held no shock, only accusation. I looked at her. "I did not leave it written down. Mom." He pried it open with a crowbar. "The tool is literally resting against the baseboard." She waved her hand, dismissing the heavy piece of iron leaning against the wall as if it were a stray sock. "You should have changed the combination after you moved your things out. You know how Liam gets when he is stressed about school. You practically invited this kind of temptation. You were careless." The sheer audacity of her logic hung in the air. She was looking at a felony in progress and blaming the victim for poor security. I felt a familiar tightness in my jaw, but I kept my face blank. This was the dynamic I had grown up with. Every failure Liam engineered was somehow a structural flaw in my character. If he failed a class, I had not tutored him enough. If he wrecked his car, I had parked too close to his side of the driveway. Richard seemed to snap out of his paralyzed state. He grabbed onto Brenda's warped reasoning like a drowning man catching a life preserver. "Your mother is right," Richard said, turning to me. His face was flushed, a deep mottled red. "You brought this on us. You knew I needed a secure place to hold that cash while the bank cleared the loan paperwork. Now the registrar is going to drop his enrollment. Do you know what that means? It means he loses his housing. He loses his credits for the semester." I folded my arms. "It means he bought a Balenciaga shoebox instead of an education," I replied. My voice remained level. "I suggest you ask him for the receipts and start driving back to the boutique before they close." Liam clutched the laptop box against his chest. "They do not take cash returns on opened electronics, and the shoes were final sale. I needed them for my fraternity formal. You cannot expect me to walk in there wearing last year's suit." He sounded like a petulant child complaining about a wrong lunch order, not a man who had just committed grand larceny. He looked at Brenda, his eyes wide and pleading. "Mom, tell her, I cannot go back to school with nothing." Brenda placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It is going to be fine. Sweetie, we will fix it." She looked at Richard. Richard looked at me. The air in the room shifted. The initial shock morphed into a calculated, predatory silence. They were no longer mourning the lost tuition. They were assessing their remaining assets, and I was the only liquid asset in the room. "You have that brokerage account," Richard said. He took a step toward me, crowding my personal space, the index funds. "I saw the tax statement you left on the kitchen counter last month. You have over 30,000 in there." I took a slow breath. He had gone through my mail. I should not have been surprised. "That is my retirement portfolio," I said. "You can pull it out," he countered, his voice rising, gaining a desperate momentum. "You take the penalty. It takes 2 hours to wire the funds to a checking account. You transfer 17,000 to my account right now. I will drive to the bank, get a cashier's check, and hand-deliver it to the bursar before 5. The demand was not posed as a question. It was an executive order. The scene had rapidly devolved from a burglary into a blatant extortion attempt. They were standing in my bedroom, surrounded by stolen goods, demanding I liquidate years of my hard-earned investments to cover a theft committed by the golden child. I am a senior risk analyst. My entire career revolves around identifying liabilities, assessing collateral, and projecting outcomes. I look at balance sheets for shipping conglomerates and tell executives when to walk away from a bad deal. I looked at the 3 people in front of me. Richard, drowning in high-interest debt from a shady title lender. Brenda, enabling a thief to maintain a fragile illusion of high society status. Liam, holding a stolen laptop like a shield. They were not a family. They were a toxic asset. They were a bottomless pit of bad debt. "No," I said. The word was sharp and short. It cut through the room, halting Richard mid-breath. "What do you mean, no?" Brenda asked. Her hand tightened on her wineglass. "Your brother's future is on the line. I mean, no. I am not cashing out my portfolio. I am not wiring you a dime. Pouring $17,000 into a student who has not attended a lecture since October is a terrible investment. He stole your money. Dad, you deal with the police. You deal with the lender. Leave my accounts out of it." Liam scoffed, leaning forward on the bed. "You are so selfish. You make 6 figures and you live here rent-free. You owe us. I pay the utility bills, the property taxes, and the grocery tabs," I reminded him, keeping my eyes locked on Richard. "And I pay the out-of-pocket costs for Grandma's home health aides twice a week." I do not live here rent-free. I subsidize this household. Richard stepped closer. His breath smelled of stale coffee and mints. You will do this. Chloe, you will log into your portal right now. I am not letting my son get kicked out of university because you want to hoard your paycheck. We are a family. Families help each other. Extortion disguised as loyalty. It was the oldest trick in their playbook. I shook my head. Not this time. Brenda stepped out from behind Liam. The comforting mother facade melted away, revealing the cold, calculating enforcer underneath. She knew yelling would not work on me. She knew physical intimidation from Richard would only make me dig my heels in deeper. She went for the one vulnerability I had left in this house. You have 24 hours, Brenda said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. You will have that money in your father's account by 500 tomorrow evening. If the transfer is not there, you can pack your bags and get out of my house. I stared at her. Richard looked slightly startled by the ultimatum, but he quickly masked it, nodding in agreement. She thought she had me cornered. She delivered the eviction threat like a master chess player making a final move. Brenda knew I did not live in this house to save money. I lived here to protect my grandmother. My grandmother occupied the converted sunroom on the first floor. She was diabetic, partially blind, and relied on me to measure her insulin doses every morning and evening. Brenda could barely be bothered to bring the old woman a glass of water, let alone manage a complex medication schedule. Brenda was betting my conscience would override my financial boundaries. She was betting I would rather lose $1,700 than leave a helpless 80-year-old woman in her negligent care. It was a hostage situation. Pay the ransom or the hostage suffers. If you kick me out, I said, keeping my tone inquisitive rather than defensive. Who is going to administer Grandma's injections? Who is going to pay for her physical therapy out of pocket? Brenda smiled, a thin, triumphant line across her face. That sounds like a heavy burden for you to bear, Chloe. It would be a real shame if your selfishness put your grandmother's health at risk. I am sure you will make the right choice by tomorrow. Liam snickered from the bed. He opened the silver laptop, ignoring the tension, already treating the machine as his rightful property. He knew he had won. He always won. I looked at the three of them. I analyzed the data. They had stolen. They had blamed. They had threatened. They had used an ailing woman as leverage. The risk assessment was complete. There was no salvaging this operation. I did not argue. I did not plead for more time. I did not try to reason with people who viewed my existence solely as an ATM machine. I understand, I said quietly. Brenda's smile widened. She took a sip of her wine. I knew you would see reason. Have it done by tomorrow afternoon. Richard, come downstairs. We need to call the registrar and ask for a 24-hour extension. They turned and walked out of the room. Liam stayed on the bed, peeling the protective plastic off the screen of his stolen computer. He did not even look up as I stood in the center of the bedroom. They thought they had broken me. They thought the threat of leaving my grandmother behind had secured their payday. They severely underestimated my ability to mitigate risk. They forgot that I managed her medical proxy. And they completely forgot that the deed to this house was holding a secret they were about to discover the hard way. I turned toward my closet and reached for the handle of my largest suitcase. Exactly 60 minutes. That is the precise amount of time it takes to dismantle a lifetime of obligations. I did not throw things into boxes. I folded my blazers, organized my financial documents, and packed 3 hard-shell suitcases with the methodical precision of an auditor closing a bankrupt account. There was no slamming of doors. There were no muffled sobs. Panic is a luxury for people who do not have an exit strategy. I always have an exit strategy. While Liam was down the hall admiring his stolen electronics, I made a 4-minute phone call. Brenda thought she held the ultimate leverage by threatening my grandmother's care. She failed to realize that a risk analyst never leaves a vulnerable asset unprotected. 6 months ago, sensing the rising financial instability in this house, I used my power as medical proxy to place a deposit at a premier assisted living facility across town. I called their emergency intake coordinator. A private medical transport was scheduled to arrive at 9:00 the next morning. My grandmother would be safely relocated while Brenda was busy sleeping off her wine. The hostage situation was neutralized before the kidnappers even realized the vault was empty. I zipped the final suitcase. The metallic click sounded like a gavel coming down. I rolled the 3 heavy bags down the hallway. The polyurethane wheels rumbled against the oak floorboards, a steady drumbeat announcing my departure. I guided them into the living room and lined them up near the front door. Richard and Brenda were sitting on the leather sofa. Richard had his phone pressed to his ear, rubbing his temples, likely begging a loan officer for a grace period he would never receive. Brenda was pouring her second glass of Pinot Grigio. When the wheels stopped rolling, they both looked up. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the sudden realization that their script had caught fire in their minds. This evening was supposed to end the way it always ended. I was supposed to pace the floor. I was supposed to argue. I was supposed to express my disappointment. And then inevitably, I was supposed to log into my brokerage account and sacrifice my stability to preserve their comfort. They relied on my anger because anger meant I still cared. My apathy terrified them. Richard slowly lowered his phone. The color drained from his face for the second time that evening. "Chloe," he said, his voice hesitant. "What is this?" "I am mitigating a loss," I replied. My tone was flat, devoid of any emotional currency. "I am moving out." Brenda set her wine glass on the coffee table. The glass clinked against the marble surface. She stood up, smoothing the front of her cashmere sweater. The shock on her face quickly morphed into a practiced theatrical indignation. She was gearing up for a performance. "You cannot be serious," Brenda said. "You are throwing a tantrum over a simple misunderstanding. Your brother made a mistake under immense pressure. We are trying to fix it, and you are packing your bags like a child." I looked at her. "Stealing $16,000 from a safe with a crowbar is not a misunderstanding, Mom. It is a felony, and extorting your daughter to cover the deficit is not fixing it. It is complicity. I am removing myself from the crime scene." Brenda stepped forward, closing the distance between us. The anger dissolved, instantly replaced by the next tactic in her arsenal, the guilt trip. Her eyes welled with tears right on cue. It was a remarkable physical trick. "After everything we have sacrificed for you," Brenda whispered, her voice trembling with manufactured heartbreak. "We put a roof over your head. We fed you. We supported you when you were studying late into the night. And now the moment your family actually needs you, the moment your brother is facing ruin, you turn your back on us. Are you really going to abandon your own flesh and blood over money?" I watched the tears spill over her eyelashes. I felt nothing. I analyzed her words the way I analyzed a fraudulent insurance claim. She spoke of sacrifices, conveniently ignoring the fact that I had paid the property taxes for the last 3 years to prevent this very house from going into foreclosure. She spoke of supporting me, omitting the reality that I had subsidized their lifestyle while Liam drained their accounts. "I am not abandoning you over money," I said quietly. "I am leaving because you view my future as a slush fund for his failures. You asked me to set myself on fire to keep him warm. The answer is no." The tears stopped working. Brenda realized the emotional manipulation was yielding zero returns. Her face hardened. The weeping mother vanished, leaving only a cornered adversary. If guilt could not open my wallet, she would resort to the ultimate punishment. "Fine," Brenda hissed, her voice dropping to a vicious octave. "Walk out that door. But if you leave this family tonight, do not expect to come crawling back when you fail. And you can forget about your inheritance. I will call the attorney tomorrow morning. I will have you struck from the will. You will not get a single cent from this estate. You will not get a square foot of this property. We will leave it all to Liam." She stood tall, waiting for the threat to land. She expected me to flinch. She believed the promise of future wealth was the chain that kept me tethered to this house. I looked at the high ceilings, the crown molding the expensive Persian rug under her feet. Then I looked at Brenda, and I smiled. It was a slow, genuine smile. They did not know what I knew. They had no idea that I had reviewed the county records during a background check for my own security clearance. I knew about the primary mortgage they had refinanced twice. I knew about the silent second mortgage Richard took out to fund a failed business venture 2 years ago. I knew about the home equity line of credit they had maxed out to pay for Liam's fraternity dues and Brenda's luxury car lease. This sprawling suburban fortress was not an asset. It was a sinking ship drowning in predatory interest rates. The equity was non-existent. The house was leveraged to the hilt. Being written out of their will was not a punishment. It was a financial rescue. By giving the estate to Liam, they were handing him a ticking time bomb of unpayable debt. "Keep it," I said, my voice light, almost cheerful. "Give him every last brick. He deserves it." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my heavy brass keychain. I detached the house key and the garage remote. I tossed them onto the glass coffee table. The metal hit the glass with a sharp final crack. "Do not forget to pack Grandma's things," I added, resting my hand on the handle of my largest suitcase. "A medical transport will be here at 9 tomorrow to take her to Oak Creek Assisted Living. Her first 6 months are already paid in full. I suggest you have her bags ready." Brenda opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The realization that I had outmaneuvered her hostage strategy paralyzed her. Richard slumped back onto the sofa, staring at the keys on the table as if they were venomous. They had nothing left to hold over my head. The vault was locked, the assets were secured, and the leverage was gone. I turned my back on them. I opened the heavy oak front door and pulled my suitcases out onto the porch. The cool evening air hit my face, smelling of pine needles and damp asphalt. It was the smell of absolute freedom. I did not look back. I loaded my luggage into the trunk of my car, got into the driver's seat, and pressed the ignition. As I pulled out of the driveway, leaving the illuminated windows of that toxic house in my rearview mirror, I felt a profound sense of relief. I had successfully excised a fatal liability from my life. I merged onto the highway, the city lights of Seattle blurring into bright streaks against the dark sky. The nightmare was over, or so I thought. 10 miles down the interstate, the digital display on my dashboard lit up. The ringing of an incoming call echoed through the car speakers. I glanced at the screen. The caller ID displayed the name Marcus. Marcus is my brother-in-law, married to my older sister, Vanessa. He is a brilliant compliance attorney for a tech conglomerate. He operates on logic, evidence, and risk assessment, much like I do. We rarely spoke during the week unless there was a scheduled family event. A call from Marcus at 9:00 on a Tuesday night meant a structural failure had occurred somewhere in our network. I tapped the button on my steering wheel to answer. "Hey, Marcus," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "I am actually driving right now. Can this wait until tomorrow?" "Chloe," Marcus said. His voice was tight, stripped of its usual calm professionalism. It was the tone of a lawyer who had just uncovered a massive regulatory violation. "You need to pull over." I frowned, easing my foot off the accelerator. "What is wrong? Is Vanessa okay?" "Vanessa is fine," Marcus replied quickly. "This is about Richard and Liam." I sighed, merging into the right lane. "I just left the house, Marcus. Liam stole 16 grand from Dad to buy designer clothes, and they tried to extort my retirement fund to cover his tuition. I packed my bags. I am done with them. Whatever drama they are spinning to you, do not buy into it." "Chloe, listen to me." Marcus interrupted, his tone sharper now. "This is not about the tuition money. Richard just called me begging for a $20,000 personal loan. He was frantic. But that is not the worst part." I guided my car onto the gravel shoulder of the highway, putting the vehicle in park. The hazard lights clicked rhythmically in the quiet cabin. "What is the worst part?" I asked. "Liam just drove up to our house 10 minutes ago." Marcus said, his words landing like heavy stones. "He wanted to show off his new car to Vanessa. Chloe, he is driving a brand new Audi sports coupe. It still has the dealer tags on it." I stared at the dark dashboard. The math instantly short-circuited in my brain. The $16,000 in cash Liam stole could not purchase a luxury sports car outright. It was barely enough to cover a generous down payment. And with Liam having zero income and Richard drowning in hidden debt, neither of them had the credit score required to secure financing for a $60,000 vehicle. "Who financed the car?" I asked, the chill from the living room returning, creeping up my spine. "That is why I am calling you," Marcus said grimly. "I asked Liam how he got the loan approved. He laughed and said his dad took care of the paperwork online yesterday afternoon. Chloe, Richard does not have the credit for that tier of financing, but you do." My breath caught in my throat. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The stolen cash was not just a theft. It was a down payment on a fraudulent contract. The extortion attempt in my bedroom had merely been a distraction. They did not just want my savings, they had already stolen my identity. The rhythmic clicking of my hazard lights filled the silence inside the car. Outside highway traffic blurred past in streaks of white and red. I gripped the leather steering wheel, the cold material offering no comfort. Marcus remained on the line. I could hear his steady breathing over the speakerphone, waiting for my analytical mind to process the raw data he had just delivered. Marcus Washington is not prone to exaggeration. He operates in a world governed by facts, regulatory statutes, and corporate oversight. As a compliance attorney for a multinational tech firm, he spends his days hunting down fraudulent activity, dismantling shell companies, and prosecuting executives who think they can outsmart the system. He grew up navigating the unforgiving realities of Chicago's South Side before earning his law degree at Georgetown. He possesses a razor-sharp intellect and a low tolerance for deception. My parents have always maintained a polite, rigid distance from Marcus. Richard masks his deep-seated resentment with superficial pleasantries, unable to accept that Vanessa married a highly successful black man who refuses to fund Richard's endless stream of bad investments. Marcus sees right through the suburban facade my parents project. He is the only person in the Thorne family network who speaks my language. We deal in evidence. We measure liabilities. Chloe, are you still there? Marcus asked, his voice low, carrying the gravity of a judge delivering a verdict. I am here, I replied. My voice sounded hollow, detached from my own body. Walk me through exactly what Richard told Vanessa on the phone. Do not skip any details. Marcus sighed. It was a heavy sound, thick with disgust. Richard called 10 minutes ago. He was playing the role of the devastated patriarch. He told Vanessa that you had been careless. He claimed you left your bedroom safe unlocked and that the cash he had saved for Liam's tuition went missing. He painted a picture of you throwing a tantrum, packing your bags, and abandoning your ailing grandmother out of pure spite. The sheer audacity of the narrative made my stomach turn. Richard was not just covering his tracks. He was actively launching a preemptive strike against my character. He knew I would eventually cut ties, so he decided to control the narrative by framing me as the negligent, heartless daughter. He aimed to isolate me from Vanessa and position himself as the victim. And then he asked for money, I stated. It was not a question. It was the only logical conclusion to that specific theatrical setup. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. He asked Vanessa for a $20,000 emergency loan. He claimed the university was going to expel Liam by tomorrow morning if the bursar did not receive a wire transfer. He begged her to save her brother's future because you had ruthlessly destroyed it. I leaned my head back against the headrest. The extortion attempt in my bedroom had merely been a distraction. Richard and Brenda never expected me to liquidate my stock portfolio. They wanted me cornered, defensive, and occupied with their screaming match, so I would not look at my phone or check my email. They needed a smokescreen while Richard was feeding Vanessa that fabricated tragedy, Marcus continued. A brand new Daytona gray Audi coupe pulled into our driveway. The engine was roaring. Dealer tags were still screwed into the bumper. Liam stepped out wearing a designer jacket, tossing a fresh set of key fobs in his hand. He walked up to our porch acting like he had just conquered the world. The cognitive dissonance of the situation was staggering. A father begging for an emergency bailout to save his son from expulsion, while that same son flaunted a luxury vehicle worth more than an average annual salary. I walked out to the driveway, Marcus said, his tone shifting into the clinical detachment of a prosecutor. I looked at the car. I looked at Liam. I knew Richard was drowning in a silent second mortgage. I knew Liam had a credit score hovering near the bottom of the barrel. Dealerships want to push inventory, but finance departments do not hand over keys to unemployed college students without ironclad collateral. I asked him who held the paper on the car. What did he say? I asked, my pulse drumming a slow, heavy beat against my ribs. He laughed, Marcus replied. He told me his dad handled the paperwork digitally. He bragged about how easy it was to secure a top-tier interest rate with an exceptional credit score, a solid employment history at a reputable logistics firm, and a substantial cash down payment. The underwriting algorithms approve the loan almost instantly. Physical signatures are frequently bypassed through electronic document platforms. Richard had my social security number. He had accessed it countless times over the years for tax purposes. He also had my recent W-2 forms, which I had foolishly left on the kitchen island last week while sorting my mail. He had my entire financial identity sitting in his hands. And he had $16,960 in stolen cash to use as a down payment. They used my identity, I whispered. The words tasted like ash. They stole my name to buy him a car. Yes, Marcus said. That is the only mathematical equation that results in Liam driving away in that vehicle. Richard weaponized your flawless credit history to secure the loan. He submitted the application under your name, named himself or Liam as a co-signer or primary driver, and forged your electronic signature. The betrayal ran deeper than a simple theft. My parents had intentionally chained me to a depreciating asset. They had fastened a $60,000 anchor to my financial record. If Liam missed a single payment, the delinquency would decimate my credit score. It would trigger red flags in my corporate security clearance. It could cost me my job. They did not just steal cash. They had jeopardized my entire livelihood to buy a status symbol. This is no longer a domestic dispute, Chloe, Marcus warned, his voice carrying a fierce protective urgency. You need to understand the terrain you are standing on. This is not family drama. This is wire fraud. This is felony identity theft. I know, I said. A lot of victims back down when the perpetrator is a blood relative, Marcus cautioned. The banks treat these situations as civil matters unless the victim is willing to file a formal police report. Lenders will not absorb a $60,000 loss just because your dad made a bad decision. If you do not go on the offensive, the bank will hold you liable for every single cent of that vehicle. They will garnish your wages. They will ruin you. How is testing my resolve? He needed to know if I was going to fold under the pressure of familial expectation or if I was going to treat this threat with the severity it required. He needed to know if the analytical risk manager was going to take the wheel. I am not backing down, Marcus, I said. My voice was steady, stripped of any lingering shock. Richard and Brenda made their choice. They decided my future was expendable. They decided my identity was currency. I am not going to protect them. Good, Marcus said. A profound sense of relief washed through his single word. Vanessa is blocking their numbers right now. We are cutting contact. You handle the financial perimeter. Call me tomorrow when the dust settles. If you need me to draft a cease and desist, say the word. Thank you, Marcus, for everything. You take care of yourself, Chloe. Do not show them mercy. They did not show you any. The line disconnected. The dial tone echoed briefly before the silence returned. I sat alone in the driver's seat. Outside, a light drizzle began to fall, the raindrops hitting the windshield in sharp, scattered taps. The hazard lights continued their rhythmic flashing, casting long shadows across the dark interior of my car. The dynamic had shifted entirely. I was no longer the unappreciated daughter trying to keep the peace. I was the victim of a coordinated financial crime. My father was the orchestrator. My mother was the accomplice. My brother was the beneficiary. I unbuckled my seatbelt and reached over to the passenger seat. I unzipped the front compartment of my work bag and pulled out my laptop. I rested the cold aluminum device on the steering wheel and opened the lid. The screen flared to life, illuminating my face in a harsh white glow. I reached for my phone and quickly activated the mobile hotspot, linking the computer to a secure network. I needed to see the damage. I needed to trace the digital footprint Richard had left behind. I needed to pull my credit report and verify the exact origin, time, and magnitude of the fraudulent contract. I typed the web address for my primary credit monitoring portal into the browser. The loading icon spun in the center of the screen, a small gray circle turning round and round in the dark cabin of the car. I placed my hands on the keyboard and waited for the numbers to load. The time for negotiating was over. The time for dismantling their lives was about to begin. The loading icon spun on the screen, casting a pale blue light across the dark interior of my car. Rain battered the windshield, distorting the headlights of passing vehicles into smeared streaks of color. I kept my hands resting lightly on the keyboard, my breathing slow and measured. Working in risk management trains your brain to detach from the emotional weight of a crisis. You learn to view a catastrophe as a sequence of data points. Panic clouds judgment. Numbers provide clarity. The credit bureau portal finally loaded. The dashboard materialized, displaying my current score, my active accounts, and my recent inquiries. I navigated straight to the alert section. There it was. The digital footprint of my father's betrayal stamped clearly in black and white. An automotive finance company had issued a hard pull on my credit file exactly 4 hours ago. Beneath the inquiry sat the newly minted trade line, a retail installment contract for a vehicle. The principal balance was $65,000. The status read active. The primary borrower was listed as Liam Thorne, with the co-signer securing the entire financial weight of the luxury coupe being Chloe Thorne. I stared at the screen. The mechanics of their crime played out in my mind with terrifying precision. Richard had not just walked into a dealership and talked his way into a set of keys. He had orchestrated a comprehensive identity theft operation. He possessed my social security number, my date of birth, and my current address. He had likely brought Liam to a dealership where the finance manager prioritized closing a high-value sale over executing rigorous identity verification. Richard had supplied my financial credentials, forged my electronic signature on a digital tablet, and bound me to a predatory loan term so his unemployed son could drive a status symbol. If this had happened 5 years ago, my reaction would have been entirely different. A younger, more naive version of myself would have slammed the laptop shut, thrown the car into drive, and sped recklessly back to the sprawling suburban house. I would have kicked the front door open. I would have screamed until my vocal cords frayed. I would have demanded explanations, apologies, and immediate restitution from the people who raised me. I would have expected remorse. But I am no longer that girl. My career has taught me a very specific, ugly truth about human nature. Remorse is a fiction invented by the guilty to avoid consequences. People who forge your signature to buy a sports car do not feel sorry for the theft. They only feel sorry when the engine stops running. I did not shed a tear. I did not feel the urge to scream. The fiery betrayal in my chest cooled into a solid glacial resolve. I opened a new browser window. My first target was the automotive finance company. I located their fraud division and initiated an online identity theft affidavit. The form required specific details regarding the fraudulent transaction. I typed in the account number, the loan origination date, and the dealership information. The system prompted me to declare under penalty of perjury that I did not authorize, participate in, or benefit from this contract. I checked the box. I submitted the claim. Next, I opened the portal for the local police department. Filing a formal police report is the only way to compel a financial institution to release you from a fraudulent debt. Banks will fight tooth and nail to keep a solvent cosigner on the hook unless you provide a localized incident report number. I filled out the personal details, the nature of the crime, and the estimated financial loss. Then I reached the section asking for the suspect's identity. The prompt offered a drop-down menu: family member, friend, acquaintance, unknown. I hovered the cursor over the options. If I explicitly named Richard and Liam, the police would likely categorize the incident as a civil domestic dispute. Lenders share this tendency. When a father steals from a daughter, banks often suggest the family settle the matter privately to avoid the administrative burden of a criminal investigation. They prefer you pay the debt rather than press charges. I clicked the box labeled Unknown Individual. It was a calculated tactical maneuver. By classifying the perpetrator as an unidentified identity thief, I triggered an automated high-priority criminal fraud investigation. The bank's security team would be forced to pull the IP address used to submit the online application. The local authorities would be forced to subpoena the security camera footage from the dealership's finance office. They would see Richard's face. They would see Liam signing the delivery manifest. The digital trail would expose them organically, leaving no room for Brenda to spin a narrative about a family misunderstanding. The trap was set, and the authorities would be the ones springing it. I received the confirmation email containing my police report number. The legal firewall was now in place. The $65,000 liability was frozen pending investigation. Liam's new car was effectively a stolen vehicle resting on a driveway built on lies. But defensive maneuvers were not enough. I needed to execute an offensive strike. I needed to sever the infrastructure that allowed my parents to maintain their comfortable illusion. I thought about the colonial house I had just fled. The pristine lawn, the high ceilings, the climate-controlled rooms. 3 years ago, during an unusually bitter winter freeze, Richard had casually ignored a final disconnection notice from the regional power grid. He claimed it was a clerical error. The heating system had shut down at midnight. The indoor temperature had plummeted. My grandmother, frail and diabetic, had shivered under a pile of woolen blankets, while Brenda complained about the inconvenience of losing her television signal. I had taken over the utility accounts that very night. I transferred the electricity, the municipal water, and the high-speed internet into my name. I linked them to my primary checking account, establishing an auto-pay schedule that guaranteed the house would never go cold again. For 3 years, I had subsidized their basic survival, while Richard funded his bad investments and Brenda poured her wine. Now the dynamic had shifted. My grandmother was safe. I had already secured her emergency relocation. The medical transport team would extract her early the next morning. There was no longer a vulnerable asset trapped inside those walls. There was no moral obligation keeping the lights on. I opened the portal for the regional electric company. I entered my secure login credentials. The user interface loaded, displaying a comforting green banner indicating the account was in good standing. A small graphic showed the current power usage. I could visualize the electricity flowing through the grid, keeping Brenda's wine refrigerator chilled, and charging the battery on Liam's stolen silver laptop. I navigated to the Service Management tab. I clicked the button labeled Stop Service. A warning box popped up on the screen. The text cautioned that immediate termination of service could result in property damage, including frozen pipes and spoiled food. It noted that restoring service would require a new activation fee, a fresh credit check, and a waiting period of up to 3 business days. I did not hesitate. I selected the option for immediate termination. I clicked Submit. The screen refreshed. Service disconnect scheduled for today. I opened the next tab, the Municipal Water Board. The interface was older, clunkier, but the process was the same. I logged in, bypassed the billing history, and found the cancellation request form. Stop service. Immediate effect. Submit. Finally, I targeted the telecom provider. The high-speed fiber optic connection was the lifeblood of that house. It was the network Liam required to stream his fraternity events, the connection Brenda used to maintain her online gossip network, and the gateway Richard exploited to hunt for predatory title loans. I logged into the master account, verified my identity PIN, and terminated the contract. The digital siege was complete. I leaned back against the driver's seat and closed my eyes, listening to the rain drumming against the roof of the car. I pictured the sprawling colonial house sitting in the affluent suburb. Utility companies in this sector utilize smart meters. They do not send a technician in a truck to physically pull a lever. They execute shutoffs remotely, sending a digital kill signal in automated batches. Sometime before 8:00 tonight, the signal would hit. The transition would be instantaneous. Brenda would be reaching for the television remote when the screen would flash and die. Liam would be setting up his stolen computer when the router lights would blink red and extinguish. Richard would walk to the kitchen sink to pour a glass of water, and the faucet would deliver nothing but a hollow, empty rattle. The house would plunge into absolute darkness, stripping away the refined suburban facade and leaving them sitting in the cold, quiet reality of their own ruin. I closed the laptop and tucked it securely into my work bag. I shifted the car into drive, the tires crunching against the wet gravel shoulder as I merged back onto the highway. I was heading toward my own pristine, secure apartment in the city. The financial lockdown was in full effect, but I knew the silence would not last. When you plunge a parasitic organism into the dark, it does not quietly accept its fate. Desperation breeds irrational, explosive tactics. Richard and Liam were about to realize the money tap was permanently welded shut, and they knew exactly where my corporate office was located. The real war was going to start tomorrow morning, and I needed to be ready for the ambush. 2 days passed in profound silence. No text messages breached my phone screen. No voicemails flooded my inbox. The digital blockade I erected held firm. I knew exactly what was happening inside that sprawling suburban house. The smart meters had executed their remote disconnects right on schedule. The heat had died. The water pressure had dropped to nothing. The internet router had gone dark. My parents and my brother were sitting in a freezing house with no running water, desperately trying to comprehend why the utilities they had taken for granted were suddenly terminated. But the quiet was deceptive. A silent enemy is a plotting enemy. I knew Richard. I knew his ego could not process defeat, especially when the defeat was engineered by the daughter he viewed as an endless ATM. He was mapping out his retaliation, and he knew exactly where to find me. On Thursday morning, I was sitting in my corner office on the 42nd floor of my logistics firm in downtown Seattle. The environment here is pristine. Glass partitions, polished concrete floors, quiet efficiency. My team assesses global supply chain vulnerabilities. We operate on fax margins and verifiable data. Emotion has no currency in this building. At 10:15, the flashing red light on my desk console interrupted my market analysis. It was the internal emergency line from the ground floor reception desk. I picked up the receiver. "Chloe, it is Sarah at the front desk." Sarah sounded breathless, her usual polished demeanor fracturing. "We have a situation down here in the main lobby. A woman claiming to be your mother and a younger man are causing a severe disturbance. They are demanding you come down immediately. They are being incredibly disruptive." The ambush had arrived. Brenda and Liam could not reach me digitally, so they opted for a physical siege. They chose my workplace intentionally. In their minds, corporate professionals dread public humiliation more than anything else. They calculated that if they created a loud, embarrassing spectacle in front of my colleagues, vice presidents, and clients, I would yield. They assumed I would drag them into a private conference room, hand over my checkbook, and beg them to keep quiet to save my professional reputation. They fundamentally misunderstood how I operate. "Do not call the police yet, Sarah," I instructed, keeping my voice smooth and level. "Signal building security to flank the reception area. I will be down in 2 minutes." I placed the receiver back on its cradle. I did not rush. I opened my lower desk drawer and retrieved a heavy cream-colored envelope. Marcus had couriered it to my office yesterday afternoon. It contained a comprehensive legal document drafted on his corporate firm letterhead. It was a preemptive strike, and it was ready for deployment. I stood up, smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer, and walked to the elevator bank. I watched the digital floor numbers descend 40, 30, 20. My pulse remained steady. I was not a daughter walking down to appease an angry mother. I was a senior risk analyst descending to neutralize a hostile liability. The elevator doors parted on the ground floor. The main lobby of our building is a cavernous expanse of white marble brushed steel and acoustic paneling designed to absorb sound. But today the acoustics were failing. Brenda's voice echoed off the imported stone, shrill and grating. I stepped out of the elevator bay and observed the scene from a distance. Brenda looked disheveled. 2 days without a hot shower or electric heating had stripped away her suburban polish. Her hair lacked its usual volume, and her beige sweater looked wrinkled. Liam stood beside her wearing his fraternity jacket, arms crossed, trying to project an air of intimidation, but mostly just looking nervous. Brenda was leaning over the reception counter, pointing a finger at Sarah. "You need to call her down here right now," Brenda demanded, pitching her voice loud enough for a group of passing executives to hear. "My daughter has abandoned her family. She left her sick grandmother to die. She left us freezing in the dark. We have no food. We have no water. I am a desperate mother, and she is a heartless monster." Several heads turned. People holding briefcases and coffee cups slowed their pace, their eyes drawn to the melodrama unfolding near the security turnstiles. Liam noticed the audience gathering. He puffed out his chest, leaning into the performance. "She stole my college tuition," Liam added, his voice projecting across the marble floor. "She is trying to ruin my life because she is jealous." It was a staggering display of psychological projection. They were standing in the lobby of a Fortune 500 company, shouting fabrications, hoping the sheer volume of their lies would force my surrender. I walked forward, my heels clicking a sharp, measured rhythm against the stone floor. I did not hurry. I did not look embarrassed. I kept my chin high and my posture rigid. 3 uniformed security guards had already taken positions around the reception desk, their hands resting near their radios, waiting for a signal. The head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Davis, made eye contact with me. I gave him a subtle downward nod. "Wait." Brenda spotted me approaching. Her eyes widened. She expected me to rush forward, shushing her, pleading for discretion. Instead, I stopped 5 feet away, maintaining a deliberate physical boundary. "Chloe!" Brenda cried out, clasping her hands together in a theatrical display of maternal agony. "How could you do this to us? How could you cut the power? You cut the water. Your father is sick with worry. You need to fix this right now. Tell these people to let us upstairs so we can talk about this like a family." I looked at her. I did not raise my voice. When you speak softly in a loud room, people lean in to listen. The passing executives paused, their attention captured by the stark contrast between her hysteria and my stillness. "We are not a family, Brenda," I stated. My words were clipped, carrying the precise articulation of a legal brief. "We are a victim and 2 perpetrators, and this is not a negotiation." Liam stepped forward, trying to close the gap I had established. He pointed a finger at my face. "You think you are so smart," he sneered. "You froze my car loan. You called the cops on Dad. You are going to log into your account right now and wire the tuition money you owe me, or I am going to stand in this lobby all day and tell every single person who walks through those doors what a sociopath you are. I will get you fired." I looked at his pointing finger, then up to his eyes. He was desperate. The realization that his designer clothes and luxury car were slipping through his fingers had pushed him into reckless territory. I raised my right hand, holding the cream-colored envelope. I extended my arm, offering it to him. Liam hesitated, his bravado faltering. He looked at the envelope, then snatched it from my hand. "What is this?" he demanded, tearing the seal open. I turned my gaze to Brenda, addressing her, while Liam pulled the thick, watermarked pages from the envelope. "That is a formal cease and desist order," I explained, keeping my tone strictly professional. "It was drafted by my attorney. It details the precise statutes regarding defamation, harassment, and extortion. It formally notifies you that any further attempt to contact me, my employer, or my colleagues will result in immediate civil litigation and requests for restraining orders." Liam stared at the legal jargon on the page. His reading comprehension was notoriously poor, but the bold red letterhead of Marcus's prestigious corporate law firm was unmistakable. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet lobby, "the financial fraud investigation is already in the hands of the authorities. The dealership security footage has been subpoenaed. Your presence here today attempting to extort funds from a witness to your felony has just been recorded by 30 high-definition cameras in this lobby." Brenda's theatrical sorrow vanished, replaced by genuine, suffocating panic. She looked around the cavernous room, suddenly acutely aware of the security cameras mounted on the walls and the silent, judging eyes of the corporate professionals watching her. The audience she had tried to weaponize against me was now witnessing her demise. "You cannot do this," Brenda whispered, the volume leaving her voice. "I already did," I replied. I turned to the head of security. "Davis," I said clearly, "these individuals are not permitted on the premises. They are trespassing. Please escort them off the property. If they resist or if they ever return, you have my authorization to involve the Seattle Police Department immediately." Davis nodded. He gestured to the 2 guards flanking him. They moved forward smoothly, forming a physical barrier between my family and the elevator banks. "Ma'am, sir, it is time to leave," Davis instructed, his voice leaving no room for debate. Liam crumpled the legal document in his fist. He glared at me, his face twisted in juvenile rage. "You are going to regret this, Chloe. You are dead to us." The threat lacked any real velocity. It was the parting shot of a defeated adversary. I turned my back on them. I did not stay to watch the security guards shepherd my mother and brother through the revolving glass doors. I did not care if they walked out quietly or if they had to be dragged onto the rainy sidewalk. The structural integrity of my professional life remained uncompromised. I walked back to the elevator, pressed the call button, and stepped inside the empty carriage. The doors slid shut, cutting off the final sounds of their eviction. I rode the elevator back to the 42nd floor in absolute silence. I felt a profound sense of victory. I had faced the ambush, disarmed the hostile actors, and fortified my perimeter. I walked back into my office and sat down at my desk. I reached for my coffee mug, ready to resume my market analysis. The war of attrition was going exactly according to plan. They were running out of resources, then my mobile phone illuminated on the desk pad. It was an automated push notification bypassing my silent mode settings. It was not a text from Marcus. It was not a message from the police department. It was a high-priority security alert from my secondary banking app. The alert system I had established for a very specific, heavily guarded financial entity, the medical trust fund I managed as the sole legal trustee for my grandmother's long-term care. I picked up the phone. The text on the screen chilled the blood in my veins. Unauthorized access attempt detected. Multiple incorrect routing queries. Electronic transfer of $92,000 initiated by secondary user Richard Thorne. My father had found the reserve vault, and he was trying to break the lock. The notification on my phone screen glowed with a sterile white light. Unauthorized access attempt. Transfer initiated. $92,000. The amount was not random. It was the exact remaining balance of the liquid cash reserves held within my grandmother's irrevocable medical trust. A fund I established 3 years ago when I noticed Richard skimming from her Social Security checks to cover his country club dues. I had legally positioned myself as the sole trustee to construct a firewall around her survival. Richard possessed a biological link to the beneficiary, but he held zero fiduciary authority over those accounts. To comprehend the sheer lunacy of his action, one must examine the timeline. It had been exactly 48 hours since the extortion attempt in my bedroom. The grace period granted by the university registrar had expired. I knew the operational protocols of elite academic institutions. The moment the clock struck 5 yesterday afternoon, automated scripts executed across the university servers. Liam's tuition balance remained unpaid. Consequently, his digital access was revoked. His student portal went dark. His dormitory keycard was deactivated, permanently locking him out of the residence hall. An automated expulsion notice was generated and dispatched directly to his inbox. The golden child, the supposed prodigy who drained our family resources, was officially in academic exile. That academic execution was the catalyst. Richard had likely watched his son receive the expulsion email. He watched the only respectable label shielding Liam from reality evaporate in real time. The realization that his son was an uneducated liability must have shattered Richard's remaining composure. Panic is a dangerous driving force. It strips away logic and leaves only raw, reckless instinct. Instead of accepting the consequence of the theft, Richard decided to rob his own ailing mother to buy his son a second chance. I did not panic. I lifted my office phone and dialed the direct priority line for the private wealth management division that held the trust. The line connected after a single ring. A senior account manager named David answered, his tone professional and crisp. "David, it is Chloe Thorne," I said, bypassing the usual pleasantries. "I need to verify an automated alert I just received regarding my grandmother's medical trust." "Hold on one moment, Ms. Thorne," David replied. I could hear the rapid clicking of his keyboard. "Yes, I see the flag. A wire transfer request for the entire liquid balance was submitted through the online portal 20 minutes ago. The routing destination is an external checking account belonging to Richard Thorne." "Did the transfer clear?" I asked, my grip tightening slightly on the receiver. "No," David stated firmly. "The system suspended the transaction immediately. The account is flagged with maximum security protocols. Any outbound transfer exceeding $10,000 requires verbal authorization from the primary trustee, which is you. The funds are currently held in a staging ledger. They have not left the institution." I exhaled a slow, controlled breath. The firewall had held. The panic Richard relied upon to bypass security measures had crashed against a wall of institutional protocol. "David, listen to me carefully," I said. "I am formally notifying you that your compliance department flagged this incident as an attempted case of elder financial exploitation. I want it documented that a third party attempted to embezzle liquid assets specifically designated for the medical care of an 80-year-old vulnerable adult. Those specific words carry immense legal weight within the United States financial system. Banks are not merely advised to monitor for elder abuse. They are bound by strict mandatory reporting laws. By uttering that exact phrase on a recorded line, I stripped the situation of its domestic context. The incident could no longer be classified as a private family dispute over inheritance. The bank was now legally obligated to escalate the matter. They had to notify Adult Protective Services. They had to forward the forged wire transfer document to state and federal investigators. Richard had just handed the authorities physical evidence of a major financial crime. I asked David to forward me a secure digital copy of the transfer request form. Within seconds, an encrypted PDF arrived in my inbox. I opened the file. It was a digital wire authorization form. The IP address logged at the bottom of the page belonged to my parents' home network. The digital signature on the approval line was a clumsy digital recreation of my grandmother's handwriting. He had forced a partially blind diabetic woman to sign a digital tablet, likely telling her she was signing a routine medical release. It was despicable. But more importantly, it was the final piece of evidence I needed to permanently dismantle his operation. I thanked David and ended the call. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the forged document on my screen. Richard thought he was playing a game of intimidation. He thought he could bully his way through closed doors and force me to capitulate. He failed to understand that I do not play games. I mitigate risk. And Richard Thorne had just upgraded himself from a nuisance to a catastrophic liability. I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus. He answered on the second ring. "Chloe, did the cease and desist land?" Marcus asked, his tone brisk. "It landed," I replied. "They staged an ambush in my corporate lobby. Security escorted them out. But that is not why I am calling. Marcus Richard just tried to wire $92,000 out of Grandma's medical trust into his personal checking account. He forged her signature on the authorization form." Silence hung on the line for a long moment. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet, the tone of a prosecutor who had just been handed the murder weapon. "Did the bank process the transfer?" "No. The security protocols caught it. The funds are frozen in a staging ledger. I just spoke with the wealth manager and formally reported it as attempted elder financial exploitation." "You reported it to the bank's compliance division?" Marcus asked, verifying the procedural step. "Yes. They are legally mandated to loop in Adult Protective Services and state investigators. The bank has the IP logs. They have the forged signature." "Chloe, listen to me very carefully," Marcus said, his professional demeanor locking into place. "Identity theft regarding a vehicle loan was a serious offense. But attempting to drain a protected medical trust belonging to an elderly citizen carries devastating legal consequences. It includes mandatory minimum sentencing in several jurisdictions. Your father had aimed to save his son from an academic failure, and in doing so, he placed one foot firmly inside a prison cell." David confirmed the escalation. He provided me with a direct reference number for the internal investigation and assured me that the compliance team would coordinate with law enforcement. I thanked him and disconnected the line. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair, gazing out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Seattle skyline. The rain had cleared, leaving the city streets shining under the afternoon sun. The financial lockdown I initiated 2 days ago was proving highly effective. My parents were trapped in a dark, freezing house with no running water. Liam possessed a luxury vehicle he could not legally drive and a university career that no longer existed. And Richard was about to become the subject of a state-level fraud inquiry. The walls were closing in on them with mathematical precision. Every lifeline they reached for turned into razor wire. But people like Richard and Brenda do not surrender gracefully. When financial manipulation fails and legal threats backfire, they revert to the only arena where they still believe they hold power: the court of public opinion. They needed to control the narrative before the police arrived at their doorstep. They needed to gather allies, twist the facts, and paint me as the villain to the extended family network. My mobile phone vibrated against the desk pad. I glanced at the screen. It was an incoming calendar invitation accompanied by a lengthy text message from my Aunt Helen. Helen is the undisputed matriarch of the extended Thorne family. She presides over a sprawling estate in Bellevue and operates as the central hub for the family gossip network. She thrives on organizing interventions and airing grievances over formal dinners. The text message dripped with manufactured concern. She wrote that Richard had contacted her heartbroken and desperate, claiming I was experiencing a severe mental health crisis and acting out against the family. Helen requested my presence at a mandatory reconciliation dinner this coming weekend at her sprawling estate. She invited the entire extended family to help mediate our tragic misunderstanding. I read the invitation and felt a cold, sharp sense of anticipation. Richard thought he could use Helen's dining room as a tribunal to force my compliance. He planned to surround me with dozens of judging relatives weaponizing their collective disapproval to make me drop the fraud charges and reinstate his funding. He assumed I would shrink under the weight of public shaming. He had no idea I possessed the physical copies of the police reports, the forged wire transfer documents, and the receipts of Liam's stolen luxury purchases. I clicked the button to accept the calendar invitation. The living room skirmishes were over. It was time to go to trial. Aunt Helen resides in a sprawling estate within a gated community in Bellevue. Her formal dining room serves as the Supreme Court for our extended family network. Helen collects secrets, categorizes failures, and distributes gossip as social currency. Receiving an invitation to one of her catered weekend dinners is never a casual affair. It is a subpoena. When the calendar notification arrived on my phone, I knew exactly what type of ambush Richard and Brenda had orchestrated. They needed a sympathetic jury. They needed a public forum to execute their smear campaign before the police arrived at their door. I parked my car on the sweeping circular gravel driveway. The evening air was crisp and biting. I stepped out, smoothing the lapels of my tailored charcoal blazer. I did not carry a purse. I carried a sleek black leather portfolio, the kind litigators bring to depositions. Inside, resting neatly behind tab dividers, was the unassailable truth. The police report detailing the felony identity theft, the dealership security camera logs, the digital timestamp of Richard's failed wire transfer from the medical trust, and the automated expulsion notice the university had sent Liam. I approached the massive oak front doors. Before I could ring the bell, the door swung open. A uniformed catering staff member ushered me inside. The low hum of conversation drifting from the formal dining room ceased the moment my heels clicked against the marble foyer. The silence was not welcoming. It was the silence of a jury watching the accused enter the courtroom. I walked into the dining room. A massive crystal chandelier cast a warm golden light over a long mahogany banquet table. Uncles, aunts, second cousins, and family friends occupied nearly every chair. As I entered, they stopped eating. They stared at me, their expressions ranging from deep disappointment to undisguised contempt. The narrative had clearly been planted long before my arrival. At the head of the table sat my mother, Brenda. She wore a simple dark dress, a stark contrast to her usual vibrant attire. She clutched a pristine white linen napkin against her chest, her face arranged in a mask of tragic suffering. She was playing the role of the besieged matriarch with terrifying dedication. Richard stood behind her chair, resting his hands on her shoulders, projecting an aura of wounded authority. Liam sat slouched in a high-backed velvet chair next to them. He wore a brand-new cashmere sweater, staring at his plate, attempting to embody the fragile victim of a sibling vendetta. I scanned the room and located my designated seat at the far end of the long table. To my immediate left sat my older sister, Vanessa, and her husband, Marcus. Marcus wore a tailored charcoal suit, his posture relaxed but highly observant. As a compliance attorney, he evaluates hostile environments for a living. He recognizes a rigged jury instantly. When I pulled out my chair, Marcus caught my eye and offered a single, almost imperceptible nod. The perimeter was secure. I had backup in the room. Aunt Helen tapped a silver spoon against her crystal wine glass. The sharp ringing commanded absolute silence from the guests. Helen announced that this gathering was meant for healing. She used grand terms like forgiveness, unity, and shared burdens. She stated that recent events had fractured the core of our family, and it was time to air our grievances to find a path forward. Then she yielded the floor to Richard. My father straightened his posture and cleared his throat. He did not look at me. He looked at his audience performing for the gallery. Richard launched into a meticulously crafted fabrication. He told the room that the immense pressures of my corporate job had triggered a severe mental collapse. He claimed my isolated lifestyle had twisted my perspective, causing me to become consumed by a deep, irrational jealousy regarding Liam and his bright academic future. According to Richard, my envy drove me to sabotage the family structure. He narrated a tragic fiction where I callously disconnected the utilities to my childhood home, leaving my frail grandmother freezing in the dark out of pure spite. He conveniently omitted the fact that I had secured a private medical transport and relocated her to a premier care facility 12 hours before the power grid shut down. He spun a malicious lie where I intercepted Liam's tuition funds, hid the money, and intentionally caused his expulsion from the university to ruin his life. The relatives murmured in sympathetic agreement. An uncle whispered something about disrespecting elders. A cousin across the table shook her head in sheer disgust. They were consuming the lies without hesitation. They were ready to watch me burn at the stake to preserve the illusion of the perfect suburban family. Richard concluded his monologue by finally turning his gaze toward me. He pointed a finger down the length of the table. He demanded accountability. He insisted that to repair the familial bond, I needed to issue a formal public apology to Liam in front of everyone present. Furthermore, he mandated that I liquidate my stock investments to reimburse the family for the emotional and financial distress I had inflicted. He stood there, chest puffed out, waiting for me to break down, confess to his imaginary crimes, and surrender my assets. I did not defend myself right away. Arguing with a liar in a public forum only validates their premise. It reduces a factual dispute to an emotional screaming match. I remained seated. I kept my face entirely blank. The power of silence is highly underestimated. When you refuse to react to a provocation, the aggressor loses their momentum. The room waited for my tears. They waited for my desperate excuses. Instead, I unzipped my leather portfolio. I reached inside and retrieved a thick-bound dossier. It contained cold, verifiable data. I stood up. The leather chair creaked slightly beneath me. I tossed the dossier onto the center of the long dining table. It hit the polished mahogany with a heavy, resounding thud. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling, silencing the murmurs of the relatives. I kept my voice clinical, projecting it clearly across the expensive floral centerpieces. That folder contains the truth about your tragic victim, I stated, locking eyes with Richard. Page 1 is a certified police report detailing felony identity theft. It documents the exact timestamp when Richard Thorne used my social security number to forge a retail installment contract for a $65,000 luxury sports car. Page 2 is the official fraud dispute filed with the auto lender. Page 3 contains the subpoena requests for the security footage logs from the dealership identifying Richard and Liam signing the fraudulent financial documents. I paused, letting the severe legal terms sink into the minds of the audience. The air in the dining room grew dense and heavy. Aunt Helen stopped breathing. Then I pointed to the second section of the dossier protruding from the folder. Page 4 is a banking ledger detailing the precise location of the missing tuition money. I continued, my voice steady and unyielding. The cash was not hidden out of jealousy. It was stolen by Liam Thorne. He pried open my bedroom safe with a crowbar and used the funds to purchase designer clothing and electronics. I have included the receipts and the transaction timestamps, but the most important document is on page 6. I shifted my gaze to Brenda, watching the color drain completely from her face. Page 6 is a digital wire authorization form. I said, my words dropping like ice water into the silent room. It documents an attempt made 48 hours ago to electronically transfer $92,000 from my grandmother's irrevocable medical trust into Richard's personal checking account. The digital signature on the authorization form is a forgery. The IP address originates from your home network. I formally reported the incident to the bank's Compliance Division and Adult Protective Services as an attempted case of elder financial exploitation. The state investigation is already active. The silence in the dining room was absolute. It was a suffocating, paralyzing quiet. The relatives who had been shaking their heads in disgust moments ago were now staring at Richard and Brenda with a mixture of horror and disbelief. The carefully constructed facade of the tragic victimized parents shattered into jagged pieces on the mahogany table. Marcus leaned forward, adjusting his cuffs. He looked at Richard, his expression devoid of any sympathy. As a compliance attorney, I highly recommend you retain criminal defense counsel immediately. Richard, Marcus said, his voice slicing through the tension, forging a signature on a vehicle loan is a federal offense. Attempting to embezzle funds from a protected medical trust belonging to a vulnerable adult carries mandatory minimum sentencing. You are facing significant prison time. Richard's bravado vanished. His shoulders slumped. He looked like a man who had stepped on a landmine and was waiting for the click. He opened his mouth to speak, to spin another lie, but he had run out of runway. The data was verifiable. The authorities were involved, and his audience had turned against him. Brenda dropped her pristine linen napkin. She covered her face with her hands, emitting a low, genuine sob of absolute terror. Liam sat frozen in his velvet chair, staring at the thick dossier on the table as if it were a venomous snake. His designer cashmere sweater suddenly looked like a very expensive prison uniform. I picked up my portfolio. I did not ask for an apology. I did not wait for an explanation. I had neutralized the threat, dismantled their network of enablers, and secured my perimeter. I turned and walked out of the formal dining room, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against the marble floor. I exited the sprawling estate and stepped out into the crisp night air. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away from the wreckage of the Thorne family. I did not look back. I had a life to build, and for the first time in 30 years, the balance sheet was finally clear. It was spent at high-end retail boutiques. You will find itemized receipts for Gucci garments, Balenciaga footwear, and a premium laptop. Liam pried open my bedroom safe with a crowbar and financed a luxury shopping spree while he was failing every single college course on his schedule. The silence in the dining room became suffocating. The clinking of silverware vanished. The judgmental whispers ceased. Aunt Helen reached forward with a trembling hand and pulled the dossier toward her. She flipped open the heavy cover. Her eyes scanned the official police seal, the bold incident numbers, and the highlighted bank transactions. She turned the page and stared at the itemized receipt for a $2,000 laptop. The contemptuous glares that had been aimed at me slowly shifted direction. 36 pairs of eyes rotated away from my end of the table. They locked onto Richard and Liam. The realization washed over the room like a cold tide. Brenda lowered her linen napkin. The theatrical sorrow vanished from her face, replaced by genuine, unadulterated panic. The color drained from her cheeks. Liam shrank back into his velvet chair, pulling his cashmere sweater tight around his body, looking like a trapped animal. Richard opened his mouth, stammering, struggling to construct a new lie to cover the documented evidence sitting in the center of the table. He waved his hands in the air, claiming the papers were fabricated, insisting it was all a terrible misunderstanding that could be explained. But the jury had already read the verdict. The evidence was irrefutable. The golden child was a thief. The righteous patriarch was a fraud. The entire foundation of their social standing was crumbling in front of their most important audience. Marcus leaned back in his chair, crossed his arms, and watched the implosion with quiet satisfaction. I watched Richard scramble for words, watching his entire reputation disintegrate before his peers. His face contorted with desperation. He took a breath, preparing to launch into another aggressive manipulation, perhaps trying to blame the dealership or claim I authorized the purchase. He never got the chance to speak. Before Richard could form a coherent sentence to defend his crimes, a sweeping beam of harsh yellow light slashed across the dark dining room windows. The rotating strobe illuminated the stunned faces of my family in rhythmic flashes. The heavy, unmistakable rumble of a diesel engine vibrated through the floorboards, coming to a halt directly in Aunt Helen's pristine driveway. Richard stopped mid-sentence, his jaw hung slack. He had been trying to assemble a narrative about a simple family misunderstanding regarding the financing paperwork. I was preparing to tell the room that the police report I placed on the table was just an overreaction to a clerical error. The arrival of a commercial recovery vehicle shattered that defense before he could articulate it. Aunt Helen walked slowly toward the bay windows. Her guests followed her lead. Chairs scraped against the polished hardwood as 36 relatives abandoned their catered meals and pressed themselves against the glass. I remained seated at the far end of the long mahogany table. I did not need to look outside. I knew exactly what was happening in the driveway. When you file a verified police report for identity theft concerning a high-value automotive loan, the lending institution does not send a polite warning letter. An unsecured luxury asset represents a severe liability on their balance sheet. The bank immediately voids the fraudulent contract and dispatches a skip tracing team to locate the collateral. They utilize automated license plate readers and mobile device tracking to pinpoint the exact location of the vehicle. They had found Liam enjoying his catered dinner in Bellevue. Through the large windows, the scene unfolded with ruthless efficiency. A heavy-duty wrecker equipped with a modern wheel lift system reversed into the circular gravel driveway. The driver wore a neon-reflective safety vest over a dark hooded sweatshirt. He stepped out of the cab carrying a heavy metal clipboard. He did not look at the sprawling estate or the manicured landscaping. He walked straight toward the Daytona gray Audi sports coupe parked near the front entrance. Liam realized what was happening a fraction of a second before anyone else. The color vanished from his cheeks. The arrogant slouch disappeared. He scrambled out of his velvet dining chair so fast it tipped backward and crashed onto the floor. He sprinted through the grand foyer and burst out the double mahogany doors into the frigid night air. He ran down the front steps, waving his arms frantically. He yelled at the recovery agent to step away from his vehicle. He claimed there was a mistake. He demanded the driver unhook the machinery. The agent did not pause his work. He engaged the hydraulic controls on the side of his truck. The heavy steel crossbar slid smoothly underneath the front tires of the Audi. The mechanized whine of the hydraulic pump echoed through the quiet gated community. Richard rushed out the front doors seconds later. He tried to exert his patriarchal authority over the situation. He puffed out his chest and marched across the wet gravel. He pointed his finger at the tow truck driver, ordering him to release the vehicle immediately. He claimed he was the primary financier and threatened to sue the towing company for trespassing and illegal seizure. The recovery agent turned around and held up his clipboard. His voice carried through the crisp evening air, penetrating the thick glass of the dining room windows, so every relative could hear his response. He stated he possessed a direct recovery order from the Central Fraud Division of the automotive lender. He informed Richard that the original loan contract was flagged for felony identity theft and was officially null and void. He then delivered the final blow. He advised my father to step away from the machinery, or he would dispatch the local police precinct to execute an arrest for obstruction. Richard froze. The threat of immediate police involvement paralyzed him. He knew his face was on the security footage at the dealership. He knew the forged electronic signature was sitting in an evidence file. Pushing the issue with a licensed recovery agent would only expedite his own arrest. He lowered his hand and took a step backward. Liam refused to accept reality. He lunged toward the driver's door of the Audi, grabbing the handle and pulling with all his weight. The doors were electronically locked. The car alarm began to blare, a piercing electronic horn that shattered the quiet dignity of the upscale neighborhood. The flashing headlights of the stolen car synchronized with the rotating yellow strobes of the tow truck. It was a beacon of humiliation, broadcasting their crimes to the entire street. The agent ignored the blaring alarm. He pulled a lever and the front end of the luxury coupe lifted into the air. The rear tires settled onto the gravel. The dealer tag, still attached to the bumper, glinted in the harsh light. The agent secured the safety straps over the front wheels, walked back to his cab, and climbed inside. He shifted the heavy truck into gear and drove away. The Audi trailed behind like a dead weight. The noise faded into the distance. The flashing yellow lights disappeared down the street. The quiet returned to the estate, leaving only the sound of a light drizzle hitting the pavement. Inside the dining room, the atmosphere was suffocating. The extended family stepped back from the windows in collective shock. Aunt Helen pressed a hand against her chest. Her social standing within the gated community was her most prized possession. Having allowed a flashing repossession to occur on her front lawn during a formal dinner party was an unforgivable offense. The relatives turned their gaze away from the empty driveway and looked at Brenda. My mother sat frozen at the head of the table. Her pristine linen napkin had fallen to the floor. The fabricated narrative of the jealous daughter and the successful golden child lay in ruins around her. Every person in that room had just witnessed the physical manifestation of her lies being towed away into the night. They saw the stolen asset. They heard the fraud investigator mentioned. They watched the mighty patriarch back down from a tow truck driver. The facade was stripped bare. The Thorne family was no longer a symbol of suburban success. They were thieves. They were frauds. They were common criminals caught in a desperate lie. Marcus leaned toward me from his seat. He kept his eyes on the stunned relatives and offered a slow nod of approval. The tactical execution was flawless. I had not raised my voice once. I had not shed a single tear. I had simply presented the data and allowed the natural consequences of their actions to arrive at their doorstep. The heavy mahogany doors opened slowly. Richard and Liam walked back into the grand foyer. Their shoes left wet, muddy footprints across the imported stone tiles. They stepped into the dining room. Their clothes were damp from the rain. Their shoulders were slumped. The arrogant posture they had carried into this house was entirely gone. Liam looked like a hollow shell. The designer cashmere sweater could not hide the fact that he was an unemployed, expelled fraudster who had just watched his only status symbol dragged away. He kept his eyes fixed on his wet shoes, unable to look his aunts and uncles in the face. Richard stood at the head of the table. He was breathing heavily. His face was a mask of unadulterated fury and crushing humiliation. He looked at the judging faces of his peers. He looked at Aunt Helen, who was visibly shaking with anger over the spectacle. Then his eyes locked onto me. I sat calmly at the far end of the table. My leather portfolio rested closed beside my water glass. I maintained a neutral, observant expression. I watched the gears turning in his head. The loss of the vehicle was a devastating public humiliation. But Richard was calculating a much darker problem. The bank had officially recalled the loan. The fraud investigation was active. Without a vehicle to return in good standing, and with a felony charge looming over his head, Richard knew he needed to clear that $65,000 deficit immediately to have any hope of negotiating with the lender to drop the criminal complaint. He needed an infusion of liquid cash by tomorrow morning to buy his way out of a prison sentence and re-enroll his son. His pride was shattered, but his survival instinct kicked into overdrive. He clenched his wet fists. His breathing grew shallow and rapid. He realized the wealthy relatives in this room would never lend him a dime after witnessing this catastrophe. He had exhausted every traditional line of credit. His pristine daughter had locked down her assets. I saw the exact moment Richard made his fatal decision. I saw the desperate, reckless glint return to his eyes. He turned his back on the silent judging room and stormed toward the hallway. He was going to find the money tonight no matter what dark corners he had to search. And in his desperate scramble for a lifeline, he was about to step directly into the final trap I had set 5 years ago. The sweeping beam of harsh yellow light from the tow truck had exposed the Thorne family to the entire Bellevue gated community. The luxury sports car was gone. The illusion of wealth was shattered. Richard stormed out of Aunt Helen's estate with a singular objective burning in his mind. He needed liquidity. The repossession of the vehicle was a devastating public execution of his social standing, but the legal ramifications looming over his head were far more lethal. The automotive finance company possessed the forged electronic signature. The fraud division was actively building a case for felony identity theft. If Richard did not inject a substantial amount of capital to pacify the lender and retract the stolen asset narrative, the local authorities would soon issue an arrest warrant. He also faced the pressing issue of Liam and the university registrar. His son was expelled. The golden child was sitting in the passenger seat of their vehicle, staring blankly at the wet asphalt. A certified failure. Brenda wept silently in the back seat during the drive home to their cold, unlit house. The utility companies had not restored the power. The structure remained a freezing monument to their ruined finances. Richard ignored her tears. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He was a man who had spent his entire adult life projecting the image of a wealthy, successful patriarch. That image was his armor. He could not tolerate the idea of Marcus and Vanessa looking down on him. He could not fathom my quiet victory. He needed to reestablish his dominance, and in his distorted worldview, capital equated to control. Traditional financial institutions were no longer a viable option. Richard had a compromised credit history, maxed out credit cards, and an active fraud alert attached to his primary address. A reputable bank would require weeks of underwriting, extensive income verification, and a pristine credit profile to approve a personal loan. Richard did not have weeks. He barely had days. He required a financial instrument designed specifically for the desperate. The following morning, Richard drove to an industrial park on the outskirts of the city. He parked his car in front of a storefront flanked by bright neon signs advertising fast cash and zero credit checks. It was a predatory title loan agency. These establishments operate on the fringes of the American financial system. They do not care about your debt-to-income ratio. They do not care about your character or your employment history. They only care about hard assets. They function as legalized loan sharks, offering immediate capital at exorbitant interest rates in exchange for the deed to your property. Richard walked through the heavy glass doors. The office smelled of cheap pine air freshener and stale coffee. He approached the counter and spoke to a clerk sitting behind a thick pane of bulletproof security glass. He did not mention the fraud investigation. He did not mention his unemployed son. He simply presented his identification and the documentation, proving he held the title to a sprawling suburban colonial home. The loan officer evaluated the property records on a computer monitor. The house carried a primary mortgage and a depleted home equity line of credit. But the regional real estate market had recently inflated local property values. There was still a margin of theoretical equity left in the structure. The officer slid a dense stack of contracts across the counter. The terms were catastrophic. The agency offered Richard a short-term, high-yield loan of $50,000. The annual percentage rate hovered near 30%. The documentation clearly outlined that if he missed a single payment schedule, the agency retained the legal authority to seize the property and auction it to recover their funds. A prudent man would have walked away. A logical man would have read the fine print, recognized the financial suicide embedded in the contract, and sought legal counsel. But Richard was operating on bruised pride and blind panic. He did not read the terms. He did not consult Brenda. He knew Brenda would violently object to risking the very roof over her head, so he kept her entirely in the dark. He grasped the pen and signed his name on the dotted line, trading the safety of his home for a temporary illusion of power. He walked out of the agency holding a certified bank draft for $50,000. In his mind, he was a conqueror. He believed this cash injection would silence the automotive lender, pay off the academic registrar, and restore his position as the untouchable head of the family. He felt a surge of arrogant triumph. He thought he had outsmarted me. I was sitting at my desk in my downtown Seattle office when my mobile phone illuminated. It was early afternoon. The city below my window was bustling with traffic and commerce. The environment in my office was serene, governed by logic and risk assessment. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. The notification displayed a new text message from Richard. I read the words slowly. "I cleaned up the mess you made. As of today, you are no longer my daughter." The text was designed to be a crushing blow. It was a calculated psychological strike. Richard meant to make me feel isolated, rejected, and defeated. He wanted me to believe he had effortlessly swatted away the consequences of his actions and banished me from his kingdom. He expected a frantic reply. He wanted me to ask how he fixed the deficit. He wanted me to beg for my place back in the family hierarchy. I set the phone down on my polished desk. I did not feel a pang of rejection. I did not shed a tear over being disowned. I felt a cold, analytical satisfaction. As a risk analyst, I track behavioral patterns. I know that desperate people with limited resources have very few avenues to secure large sums of capital within a 24-hour window. If Richard had produced enough money to feel this victorious overnight, he did not earn it. He borrowed it. And given his heavily compromised financial status, he could only borrow against a hard asset. He only had one asset left to his name. I opened my laptop and bypassed my corporate email. I logged directly into the King County Public Property Records database. The portal allows citizens to view all registered encumbrances, deeds, and liens attached to any residential address within the jurisdiction. I typed in the address of the suburban colonial house where I grew up. The search results populated on my screen in neat, organized rows. I scrolled past the initial mortgage filings from 2 decades ago. I scrolled past the home equity line records from 3 years prior. I looked at the date column. A new entry had been registered exactly 2 hours ago. It was a secondary deed of trust filed by a commercial hard money lender. Richard had leveraged the property. I looked at the screen and smiled a genuine, unrestrained smile. Richard thought he had executed a brilliant tactical maneuver. He believed securing that predatory loan was his salvation. He was too arrogant to realize that he had just committed financial suicide. He was too financially illiterate to understand the hidden architecture of his own property records. 5 years ago, Richard faced a similar liquidity crisis. He had mismanaged a business investment and stood on the brink of foreclosure. I was the young, reliable daughter who bailed him out. But I did not simply hand him cash from my savings. Marcus had advised me to protect my investment like a corporate entity. I had established an anonymous limited liability company and issued Richard a private commercial loan to save his house. I had legally recorded a silent second lien against the property deed to secure my funds. That contract contained a very specific non-negotiable covenant. It stipulated that if Richard ever encumbered the property with additional debt without the express written consent of my holding company, my entire loan would become immediately due in full. Furthermore, a breach of that covenant granted my company the immediate right to initiate foreclosure proceedings. Richard had forgotten about the fine print. He had forgotten who actually held the leash to his precious suburban fortress. By signing that predatory title loan this morning to save Liam, he had just breached the core covenant of our contract. He sent a text message to disown me. He did not know that his desperate attempt to save face had just handed me the legal authority to seize his home. The ticking time bomb I planted 5 years ago had just reached 0. The digital clock on my office computer displayed 2:00 in the afternoon. The county property records database remained open on my monitor. The fresh filing for a predatory title loan glared back at me from the screen. Richard had encumbered his suburban colonial house with a $50,000 high-yield debt. He had traded the physical deed of his home for a temporary infusion of cash to pacify the auto lender and the university registrar. He sent me a text message bragging about his victory and formally disowning me. I picked up my smartphone and read his text message one more time. "I cleaned up the mess you made. As of today, you are no longer my daughter." He believed he held the upper hand. He assumed his financial maneuvering had neutralized my leverage. He thought the house was his to leverage, his to gamble with, and his to lose. He was operating under a fatal misconception regarding the true ownership structure of the property he slept in. I opened a secure, encrypted folder on my local hard drive. I bypassed the standard logistics firm files and navigated to a directory labeled Personal Assets. Inside this directory sat a subfolder bearing the name of a Delaware-registered limited liability company, Ironclad Asset Management. I clicked the folder. A digitized PDF document appeared. The header read, Promissory Note and Deed of Trust. The signatures at the bottom belonged to Richard Thorne and a registered corporate agent. My name did not appear anywhere on the 50-page legal document. To understand the trap Richard had just stepped into, one must look back 5 years. Richard has always possessed a severe allergy to honest labor and an unearned confidence in his own business acumen. 5 years ago, he decided to launch an independent consulting firm. He leveraged his existing home equity to rent a premium office space, hire unnecessary administrative staff, and purchase expensive marketing materials. The venture imploded within 8 months. He failed to secure a single viable contract. The resulting financial crater threatened to consume the family home. The primary mortgage lender issued a pre-foreclosure warning. Brenda spent her days weeping in the living room, terrified of losing her social standing in the neighborhood. Liam was a teenager oblivious to the impending eviction. I was the only earning member of the family with liquid capital. Richard approached me, his pride momentarily suppressed by the threat of homelessness. He asked me for $85,000 to clear the arrears and stabilize the primary mortgage. He presented it as a temporary family favor, promising to pay me back as soon as he found stable employment. I was willing to prevent my grandmother from losing her residence, but I was a risk analyst. I do not hand out unsecured six-figure sums based on verbal promises from a man with a proven history of fiscal irresponsibility. I consulted Marcus. My brother-in-law reviewed Richard's financial history with the cold precision of a corporate compliance officer. Marcus told me that giving Richard unsecured cash was equivalent to throwing it into an incinerator. He advised me to treat the transaction as a hostile corporate bailout. Marcus utilized his legal expertise to establish Ironclad Asset Management. The company was registered in Delaware, a state renowned for shielding the identities of corporate officers. We hired a third-party registered agent to handle all public-facing documentation. Through this anonymous entity, I issued Richard a commercial loan for $85,000. We secured the loan by recording a silent second lien against the deed to the suburban house. Richard was so desperate for the capital to stop the primary foreclosure that he signed the towering stack of legal documents without reading a single paragraph. He assumed Ironclad Asset Management was just a boilerplate requirement I needed for tax purposes. He took the $85,000, paid off his arrears, and immediately returned to his arrogant posture. He never made a single repayment on the principal balance. I never pressed him for it, allowing the debt to sit dormant against the property records. He failed to read the core covenant buried on page 14 of the promissory note. I scrolled down the PDF on my monitor and located the exact clause. It was an acceleration provision concerning property encumbrance. The legal language was unambiguous. It stated that the borrower, Richard Thorne, was strictly prohibited from executing any additional loans, mortgages, or liens that would reduce the available equity of the property without the express written consent of Ironclad Asset Management. The clause contained a lethal trigger. If the borrower violated this condition by encumbering the property with new debt, the entire principal balance of $85,000 plus 5 years of accrued compound interest would become immediately due in full. If the borrower failed to produce the capital within 3 business days, the holding company possessed the unilateral right to initiate formal foreclosure proceedings and seize the asset. By signing that predatory title loan at the strip mall agency this morning, Richard had legally subordinated my company's financial position. He reduced the equity of the house without my permission. He tripped the wire. I picked up my office phone and dialed Marcus. He answered on the first ring. "I need you to pull up the King County property records," I said, my voice calm, settling into a familiar operational rhythm. "Check the filings for Richard's address." I heard the rapid clacking of Marcus typing on his mechanical keyboard. A few seconds of silence passed. Then I heard him exhale a sharp breath. He took out a hard money loan. Marcus noted, his tone reflecting a mixture of disbelief and professional disgust. $50,000 against the deed. He went to a predatory title agency. The interest rate on this instrument is financial suicide. He did it to pay off the automotive lender and the university registrar, I explained. He sent me a text message 10 minutes ago bragging about cleaning up the mess. He also officially disowned me in the same message. Marcus let out a low, humorless laugh. "He disowned you." "Yes," I replied, "which means I no longer have any filial obligations to consider. He breached the encumbrance covenant on the ironclad promissory note. The acceleration clause is now active. Marcus did not hesitate. The legal parameters were black and white. He triggered the default, Marcus confirmed. The $85,000 principal is due immediately. Do you want me to draft the notice of default? I already have the template open, I said. I just need you to review the statutory language for the state jurisdiction before I send it to the registered agent for processing. Send it over, Marcus instructed. We need to move fast. If he pays the auto lender with that cash, the money is gone. He will have zero liquidity to satisfy the ironclad debt. When the acceleration notice hits him, he will be trapped between a predatory title loan and an aggressive corporate foreclosure. I attached the drafted legal notice to an encrypted email and sent it to Marcus. We remained on the line while he reviewed the document. The notice of default is a severe legal instrument. It outlines the specific breach of contract, cites the relevant clauses, and demands immediate restitution. It serves as the official precursor to property seizure. The language is flawless, Marcus said after a minute of reading. It is cold, compliant, and legally airtight. I am forwarding this to the Delaware registered agent right now. They will attach the corporate seal and transmit it to a local process server in Seattle. I want it hand-delivered, I specified. I do not want this sent through certified mail where he can ignore the delivery slip. I want a licensed process server to walk up to his front door, look him in the eye, and hand him the physical consequence of his arrogance. I know exactly who to call, Marcus replied. I use a private courier firm for hostile corporate litigation. They do not knock once and leave. They wait. They verify identity. They execute the service. He will have the papers in his hands by tomorrow morning. Thank you, Marcus. You built a brilliant trap. Chloe, he walked right into it. Let me know when the courier confirms delivery. I disconnected the call. I looked at the text message from Richard still glowing on my mobile screen. He believed he had won a decisive victory. He thought the influx of dirty cash had repaired his crumbling facade. He planned to spend the evening acting like the triumphant patriarch, likely handing Liam a cashier's check for the university and calling the automotive lender to negotiate a settlement. He was sleeping in a house he no longer controlled. He was breathing air in a living room owned by an anonymous corporation. He had just signed away his kingdom to save a stolen car. I closed the property records database and returned to my market analysis spreadsheets. The logistics firm required my attention. The domestic dispute was no longer a personal matter. It had transitioned into a standard corporate debt recovery operation. Somewhere in the city, a private courier was printing a thick stack of legal documents. The papers were being stamped, sealed, and placed into a rigid manila envelope. The process server was logging Richard's suburban address into a GPS navigation system. The countdown had officially begun. The morning sun would bring a knock at the door, and the man who thought he could discard his daughter would discover that she held the deed to his entire existence. 3 days elapsed since Richard sent his triumphant text message. He utilized a portion of his predatory title loan to restore the municipal utilities. The electricity returned, the water flowed, the internet router glowed green in the living room. In his mind, he had successfully stabilized the structure of his life. He had purchased a reprieve, paying off the university registrar, and negotiating a temporary hold with the automotive lender regarding the frozen car loan. He was sitting at his kitchen island on a Thursday morning drinking hot coffee, enjoying the illusion of his restored empire. He believed he had outmaneuvered me. He believed the consequence of his theft was a minor inconvenience he had paved over with borrowed cash. At 9:00 in the morning, a heavy knock echoed through the front hallway. Richard set down his ceramic mug. He walked to the foyer and pulled open the heavy oak door. A man in a plain gray windbreaker stood on the porch. The man did not wear a uniform. He held a thick manila envelope and a digital tablet. The man asked to confirm the identity of the homeowner. Richard, accustomed to receiving packages for Brenda's online shopping habit, nodded and stated his name. The man handed over the thick envelope, tapped a confirmation button on his tablet, and spoke a single definitive sentence. "You have been served." The man turned and walked back to an unmarked sedan parked on the street. Richard closed the door. He tore the perforated edge of the envelope. He pulled out a dense stack of legal documents printed on heavy bond paper. The cover page bore the seal of the County Superior Court. The bold, capitalized letters at the top of the page read, "Notice of Default and Intent to Foreclose." Richard felt a sudden drop in his stomach. He scanned the plaintiff section. The document listed Ironclad Asset Management as the primary lion holder. Richard frowned. The name sounded vaguely familiar, representing a minor administrative detail from a financial crisis he navigated 5 years ago. He assumed it was a clerical error. He assumed a bank had misfiled a document. He grabbed his mobile phone and dialed a local real estate attorney he occasionally used for minor property disputes. High demanded the attorney pull the county filing and explain why a dormant holding company was threatening to seize his property. The attorney requested a few minutes to access the digital registry. Richard paced the hardwood floor of the living room, his confidence giving way to a creeping sense of dread. 10 minutes later, the attorney called back. The lawyer explained the legal mechanics of the acceleration clause. He informed Richard that by securing a high-yield title loan earlier that week, he had breached a restrictive covenant on a silent second mortgage. The $85,000 principal was now due immediately. Richard argued with the attorney. He demanded to know who authorized the foreclosure. He ordered the lawyer to find out who controlled the anonymous Delaware corporation. The attorney explained that while Delaware shields corporate owners, the specific notice of default required the signature of a managing executive to be legally actionable in this jurisdiction. The lawyer directed Richard to turn to the final page of the document stack he was holding. Richard flipped through the heavy pages. He reached the signature block. The ink was printed clearly above the title of Chief Executive Officer Chloe Thorne. The ceramic coffee mug slipped from Richard's hand and shattered against the floor. Dark liquid pooled across the hardwood. The arrogance that had fueled him for the past 3 days evaporated in a single heartbeat. The realization hit him with the force of a physical impact. I had not walked away empty-handed. I had not surrendered. I had simply stepped back to let the trap spring shut. He realized that the daughter he proudly disowned earlier that week held the execution warrant to his entire suburban existence. The $50,000 he borrowed from the title agency was gone dispersed to cover Liam's mistakes and the utility bills. He had zero liquidity. He had 3 business days to produce $85,000, or I would legally seize the roof over his head. Panic is a highly predictable response. When a predator loses its leverage over one victim, it does not engage in self-reflection. It pivots. It searches the perimeter for a softer target. Richard and Brenda had exhausted their credit. They had alienated their social circle following the tow truck incident. They had pushed me into hostile litigation. There was only one remaining asset in the family network possessing an unencumbered financial profile: my older sister, Vanessa. Vanessa lives in a quiet, affluent neighborhood in Bellevue. She is a pediatric nurse, naturally empathetic and chronically averse to conflict. She spent her childhood attempting to act as the peacemaker between Brenda's volatile moods and Richard's rigid demands. She married Marcus 5 years ago, building a stable, insulated life far away from the daily chaos of our parents. She had largely stayed out of the recent fallout, assuming the broken safe and the repossessed car were just another iteration of Liam's endless drama. She did not know the depth of the financial rot. She did not know about the forged auto loan or the impending foreclosure. Richard and Brenda did not call ahead. Calling ahead allows a target to prepare boundaries. They drove straight to Bellevue on a Saturday morning. They parked their vehicle in Vanessa's driveway and walked up to the front porch. Marcus was in the backyard reading a legal briefing. Vanessa opened the front door wearing casual weekend clothes. Before she could even offer a greeting, Brenda launched the offensive. The tears flowed instantly. The theatrical distress was dialed to maximum capacity. Brenda collapsed into Vanessa's arms, sobbing uncontrollably, playing the role of a terrified, victimized mother facing sudden homelessness. Vanessa guided them into her living room, her nursing instincts taking over. She offered them water and asked them to explain the crisis. Richard took the floor. He utilized the exact same manipulation script he had attempted to run on me in my bedroom. He fabricated a narrative where I was the ruthless aggressor. He told Vanessa that my corporate success had turned me into a cold, vindictive monster. He claimed I had secretly bought the debt on their house years ago and was now weaponizing a legal loophole to throw my own parents onto the street out of pure jealousy over Liam. He painted a picture of imminent ruin. He described the process server, the legal documents, and the looming deadline. Then he presented his solution. He looked around Vanessa's beautifully decorated living room. He noted the high-end furnishings and the clear evidence of financial stability. He told Vanessa that family must protect family. He stated that since I had betrayed them, she was their only hope for survival. He demanded that Vanessa and Marcus visit their bank on Monday morning and extract a home equity loan against their Bellevue property. He needed them to hand over $85,000 in cash to satisfy my foreclosure notice. Brenda amplified the pressure. She grabbed Vanessa's hands, squeezing them tight. She weaponized every childhood memory, every parental sacrifice, and every ounce of filial guilt she could summon. She told Vanessa that if she refused to take out the mortgage, their parents would be living in a homeless shelter by the end of the month. She framed the financial extraction not as a loan but as a moral duty. They expected Vanessa to fold. They assumed her empathetic nature would override any logical resistance. They believed the sheer weight of a weeping mother and a desperate father would force her to kneel and sign away her own financial security to patch the holes in their sinking ship. They thought they had cornered the perfect victim. They thought Vanessa would write the check just to make the crying stop. They failed to account for the man standing in the doorway leading to the backyard. Marcus had heard the entire pitch. The compliance attorney was watching the predator's attempt to drain his wife, and the dynamic in the room was about to undergo a radical transformation. Marcus stepped out of the shadow of the hallway archway. He held a legal pad in one hand and a silver pen in the other. He had listened to the entire pitch in silence, analyzing the extortion attempt as if evaluating a hostile corporate merger. Vanessa sat on the edge of the sofa, looking overwhelmed by the sudden influx of tears and demands. Richard and Brenda thought they had isolated the weak link in the chain. They did not factor the compliance attorney into their arithmetic. "The answer is no," Marcus stated. His voice carried the resonant, unyielding authority of a judge issuing a final ruling. Marcus walked into the center of the living room. He did not raise his voice or match Brenda's theatrical distress. He operated on facts. "You are not asking for a favor, Richard. You are asking my wife to assume an $85,000 liability to cover a breach of contract you triggered. You took out a predatory title loan to cover up a felony auto fraud. Chloe did not ambush you. She enforced a covenant you signed 5 years ago after you nearly lost that same house the first time." Vanessa looked up, her eyes darting between Marcus and her father. "What auto fraud? What title loan?" she asked, the confusion morphing into sudden alarm. Marcus looked at his wife. "Richard stole Chloe's identity to finance a $65,000 sports car for Liam. He forged her signature. When the lender recalled the loan, he secretly leveraged your childhood home at a 30% interest rate to buy time. He is drowning in debt he created, and now he wants us to hand over the equity in our home to plug his sinking ship." Richard's face flushed a deep, mottled red. His authority was being stripped away in front of his oldest daughter. He tried to reclaim the narrative, puffing out his chest and stepping toward Marcus. "This is family business. You stay out of this. You do not understand how we do things in this house." "I understand mathematics," Marcus replied calmly. "I understand that funding a liability never fixes the root cause. If we give you the equity from our home, you will burn through it in 6 months, default on the new payments, and drag us down into bankruptcy alongside you. The financial well is closed." Brenda realized the logical argument was unwinnable. Marcus had immunized Vanessa against the guilt trip by exposing the fraud. The weeping mother facade cracked, revealing the venomous core beneath. She dropped Vanessa's hands and stood up. Her eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice. She turned her focus entirely onto Marcus. "You have always been the problem," Brenda hissed, her voice vibrating with ugly hostility. "You arrogant outsider. You come into our family with your expensive suits and your law degree, and you think you are better than us. You think because you sit in a glass office you can dictate how my daughters treat me." Marcus did not flinch. He stood perfectly still, letting her dig her own grave. "You are poisoning them against their own blood." Brenda continued, the coded language slipping into territory that was impossible to ignore. "You people always try to tear down what successful families have built. You are turning Chloe into a ruthless machine, and now you are brainwashing Vanessa. You do not belong here. You never did. You will never understand our values." The implications hung heavily in the air. The resentment she harbored toward Marcus was not just about money. It was rooted in an insidious prejudice she had masked with polite suburban smiles for 5 years. She resented his intellect. She resented his stability. And most of all, she resented that a black man from the South Side held the power to deny her demands. Vanessa sat frozen on the sofa. For her entire life, she had played the role of the mediator. She absorbed the tension, smoothed over the insults, and bent backward to keep the peace. She had trained herself to ignore the subtle, passive-aggressive remarks her parents directed at her husband over the years. But this was not subtle. This was a naked, malicious attack on the man who protected her, the man who built a safe harbor for her, away from the chaotic toxicity of her upbringing. Something inside Vanessa snapped. The chronic peacemaker vanished. She stood up. Her movements were deliberate, devoid of her usual hesitation. She stepped directly between Brenda and Marcus, using her own body as a physical barrier. "Get out," Vanessa said. The instruction was quiet, yet it carried a lethal edge. Brenda blinked, momentarily confused by the sudden shift in dynamics. Vanessa, honey, you need to listen to me. He is controlling you. I said get out of my house. Vanessa repeated, her voice rising in volume and intensity. You come into my home. You demand we risk our financial future to cover Liam's crimes. And when Marcus tells you the truth, you insult him. You speak to my husband like he is beneath you while you are the ones begging for a handout. Richard stepped forward, attempting to salvage the mission. Vanessa, be reasonable. We are your parents. If you do not help us, we are going to lose the house. We will have nowhere to go. Then you better start packing, Vanessa replied, because you are not getting a single cent from us. Marcus is my family. Chloe is my family. You and Liam are just liabilities. I spent 30 years watching you sacrifice Chloe to prop up that boy, and I stayed quiet. I am done being quiet, and I am done being your backup plan. Brenda opened her mouth to argue, but Vanessa pointed a firm finger toward the front door. The gesture was absolute. If you do not walk out that door right now, Marcus will call the police and have you removed for trespassing. And if you ever speak to my husband that way again, I will personally ensure you never see me or your future grandchildren again. We are done. Do not call my phone. Do not show up at my property. You are on your own. The finality of the statement struck Richard and Brenda like a physical blow. The safety net they assumed would always be there had just been incinerated. They looked at Vanessa, searching for a trace of weakness, a hint of the compliant daughter they had raised. They found nothing but reinforced steel. Richard grabbed Brenda by the arm, roughly pulling her toward the foyer. They did not say another word. They walked out the front door, their shoulders hunched under the weight of total defeat. Marcus stepped forward and shut the heavy door behind them, engaging the deadbolt with a resounding click. Vanessa let out a long, shaky breath and leaned against Marcus. He wrapped his arms around her, offering a silent anchor in the storm. The toxic alliance had been fully isolated. The parents had severed their last remaining lifeline through their own arrogance and prejudice. Outside, Richard sat in the driver's seat of his car, staring blankly at the steering wheel. The Bellevue neighborhood was quiet, offering no sanctuary. The $85,000 deadline loomed over him like an executioner's blade. He had no credit. He had no allies. His daughters had formed an impenetrable wall against him. He was out of options, out of time, and running out of sanity. But survival instinct is a dark and twisted mechanism. As he drove away from Vanessa's estate, a grim calculation formed in Richard's mind. He realized that appealing to familial duty had failed. Logic had failed. Intimidation had failed. If he wanted to save himself and keep the house, he had to offer the one thing he had spent his entire life protecting. He had to offer up the golden child. He pulled his phone from his pocket, scrolling past the blocked numbers until he found my contact. He prepared to make a trade so vile it would permanently alter the foundation of our existence. My apartment sits on the 28th floor of a high-rise building in downtown Seattle. Access to my residence requires a registered key fob for the main lobby, a secondary biometric scan for the elevator carriage, and a physical key for the reinforced front door. The architecture is explicitly designed to keep unwanted variables outside. I prefer a controlled perimeter. At 11:00 on a Sunday night, the intercom panel mounted on my kitchen wall chimed. The late hour indicated an anomaly. The night concierge informed me that a man claiming to be my father was pacing the front vestibule requesting immediate entry. I could have instructed the security desk to turn him away. I could have threatened to call the police for trespassing. Instead, I authorized his access to the elevator. A risk analyst understands that a desperate debtor will inevitably seek a parley right before the final default. When the pressure becomes unbearable, human beings reveal their true baseline. I wanted to see what collateral he had left to negotiate with. I walked to my kitchen island, poured a glass of cold water, and placed my smartphone face down on the polished quartz surface. I tapped the screen once, navigating to the voice memo application. I hit record. The small red timer began counting the seconds in silence. I walked to the front hallway and waited. A heavy, frantic knocking rattled the wood. I turned the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Richard stood in the hallway. The physical transformation was startling. The arrogant patriarch who had confidently disowned me via a text message just a few days prior was entirely gone. In his place stood a broken, aging man carrying the weight of his own collapsing empire. His posture was slouched, his shoulders rounded in defeat. He wore a damp trench coat that smelled of stale rain and exhaust fumes. He looked past my shoulder into the pristine, brightly lit apartment, taking in the undeniable reality of the life I had built completely without his assistance. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. He did not issue demands. He did not attempt to project authority. He began to weep. It was not the theatrical, performative crying Brenda favored during her social gatherings. It was the visceral, ugly sobbing of a man who realized the ground had permanently vanished beneath his feet. He sank onto my living room sofa, burying his face in his trembling hands. "Chloe, please." He choked out, his voice muffled by his palms. "You have to stop the foreclosure. You have to call off Ironclad Asset Management. We have nowhere to go. The title loan agency is threatening to seize the vehicles. The bank froze our remaining checking accounts because of your police report. The neighborhood association is sending notices because the lawn is dying. We are ruined." I remained standing in the center of the room. I did not offer him a tissue. I did not offer comfort. I looked down at him with the same detached observation I reserve for a failed corporate audit. "You ruined yourselves," I stated. My voice remained perfectly level, offering no emotional traction for him to grip. "You stole my identity. You leveraged a house you did not own. You violated a legal covenant signed 5 years ago. The $85,000 note is due on Tuesday. If the funds are not wired to my holding company by close of business, the property transfers. The eviction notice will follow shortly after." Richard slid off the sofa. His knees hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud. The authoritarian figure who had demanded my subservience for 3 decades, the man who had ordered me to empty my retirement portfolio to save his son, was kneeling in my living room. He clasped his hands together in front of his chest. "I am begging you," he whispered, looking up at me with red, bloodshot eyes. "I will do whatever you want. I will sign whatever you need. Just give me more time. I can find a buyer for the house. I can get a second job. I can work night shifts at the warehouse down the highway. Please do not put your mother on the street." I studied his face. "Time is not a currency the bank accepts, Dad," I replied. "And it is certainly not a currency I accept. You exhausted my patience the moment you forged my electronic signature. You have nothing left to offer." That exact sentence triggered a fundamental shift in his demeanor. The weeping stopped. The tears dried instantly. The survival instinct of a cornered predator overrode the despair. He realized that begging would yield zero return on investment. Pleading to my conscience was a failed strategy because he had spent my entire life proving he had no conscience of his own. If he wanted to save his shelter, he needed to offer a trade. He pushed himself off the floor, sitting back on the edge of the leather sofa. He wiped his face with the back of his damp sleeve. His eyes narrowed, calculating a new trajectory. The desperation bred a sudden, terrifying clarity in his expression. "What if I give you the person responsible for the car?" he asked. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, as if we were negotiating a cartel plea deal. I kept my expression neutral, betraying no surprise. "You are the person responsible for the car," I countered. "You submitted the application. You signed the delivery manifold. Marcus verified your digital footprint." Richard shook his head vigorously, leaning forward until he was perched on the very edge of the cushion. "No," he insisted. "I can go to the police tomorrow morning. I can tell the detectives it was Liam." I did not interrupt. I let the silence invite his betrayal. "I will testify that Liam stole your social security card from my home office safe," Richard continued, his words rushing out in an eager, frantic torrent. "I will sign a sworn affidavit stating that Liam orchestrated the entire financing scheme online while your mother and I were asleep. I will tell the investigators that Liam coerced me into driving him to the dealership, threatening to harm himself if I did not play along with his plan. I will tell them he printed the fake documents. I will hand them the golden boy. I will give them everything they need for a felony conviction." I let his proposal hang in the quiet air of my apartment. The magnitude of his treachery was staggering. He was offering a sacrificial lamb. He was willing to construct a comprehensive perjury to frame his own son for a federal crime. Liam, the child he had coddled, protected, and funded at the expense of my own well-being, was now nothing more than a bargaining chip. Richard saw the pending felony charges. He saw the looming foreclosure. And he decided his favorite child was the optimal price for his own freedom. "How exactly would that benefit me?" I asked. My tone implied a mild curiosity, encouraging him to dig his grave deeper. "It clears your name instantly," Richard explained, gesturing with his hands to emphasize the logic of his betrayal. "The police close their investigation because they have a prime suspect handed to them on a silver platter by his own father. The auto lender drops the liability from your credit report because the real thief goes behind bars. You get your pristine financial record back. And in exchange, you call off the ironclad foreclosure. You tear up the promissory note. You let your mother and me keep the house free and clear. We trade the boy for the property. Let me ensure I understand the parameters of your offer, I said, pacing slowly toward the kitchen island. You are willing to commit perjury. You are willing to testify against Liam in open court. You are willing to send your 24-year-old son to a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and identity theft. And you will do all of this just to erase a debt you owe to me. Yes, Richard confirmed without a single hesitation. The word fired out of his mouth like a bullet. He did it. He deserves the punishment. He's out of control. Chloe, he ruined our family. He spent the tuition money on garbage. If sending him to jail saves my house, I will call the detective tomorrow morning. Just draft the agreement to cancel the foreclosure. I looked at the man sitting on my sofa. I searched his face for a flicker of paternal regret. I looked for a shred of hesitation, a momentary pause where a father might realize he was selling his own offspring into the penal system to avoid paying a bill. There was none. He was entirely consumed by self-preservation. He had spent his life demanding unconditional loyalty from his children, yet the moment his physical comfort was threatened, he eagerly offered his son to the wolves. I did not interrupt him. I asked clarifying questions. I asked him to detail exactly how he would explain the forged signature to the prosecuting attorney. He spent the next 20 minutes outlining a complex fabricated timeline where Liam manipulated the dealership finance manager. He detailed the lies he would tell the judge under oath. I wanted his betrayal structured, comprehensive, and undeniable. I needed him to articulate the depths of his malice. I nodded slowly, coming to a halt near the kitchen counter. I understand your proposal, I said. I will take it under advisement. You need to leave my apartment now. Richard stood up. A glimmer of profound relief returned to his eyes. He thought he had successfully negotiated a settlement. He thought he had found the magic lever to halt the wrecking ball. He believed his willingness to destroy his son had purchased his salvation. He thanked me, straightening his wrinkled coat, and walked out the front door. The deadbolt engaged behind him with a heavy metallic clack. I walked back to the kitchen island. I picked up my smartphone from the quartz surface. I tapped the screen, stopping the voice memo recording. The digital audio file was 45 minutes long. It captured every sob, every plea, and every single word of the most vile, unforgiving betrayal a father could inflict upon a son. It captured Richard explicitly promising to frame Liam for a felony to save his own real estate. Richard thought he had bought his freedom. He did not realize he had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy the golden child from the inside out. The digital audio file sat on my phone screen. It was 45 minutes of undeniable treachery. I did not keep it for leverage. I did not archive it for a future court date. I tapped the share icon, selected Liam from my contact list, and hit send. I did not attach a text message. I did not offer any context. The recording required no introduction. Revenge is a crude concept. It implies an active emotional retaliation. I prefer the mechanics of consequence. When dealing with a parasitic ecosystem, you do not need to burn the structure to the ground. You simply introduce a single factual data point and allow the inherent greed of the participants to tear the foundation apart from the inside. 20 miles away, the suburban colonial house sat under the dark Seattle sky. Richard had used a portion of his predatory loan to restore the municipal utilities. The heating vents pushed warm air into the hallways. The internet router hummed with a green light. But the house was dead. The illusion of safety had been towed away the previous night. Liam was sitting in the dark in his bedroom. His designer wardrobe and luxury laptop were small comforts against the crushing weight of his reality. He was expelled. He was a suspect in an active fraud investigation. He was waiting for his father to return and offer a magical solution. He heard the front door open downstairs. He heard Richard walk into the kitchen and pour a drink. Liam did not go down to greet him. He assumed Richard was formulating a master plan to save them both. His smartphone illuminated on his nightstand. A media file arrived from my number. Liam picked up the device. He pressed play. The audio quality was pristine. My kitchen acoustics captured every nuance of the conversation. Liam listened as Richard wept on my sofa. He heard the desperation in his father's voice. Then the tone shifted. Liam heard the exact second his father decided to trade him for real estate. The recording captured Richard carefully outlining his perjury. Liam heard the man who had coddled him his entire life construct a meticulous, fabricated timeline designed to send him to a federal penitentiary. He heard Richard explicitly state that Liam deserved the punishment. He heard his father offer to walk into a police precinct at dawn and hand the detectives the golden child on a silver platter just to erase a debt and keep the house. The psychological foundation of Liam's existence shattered. For 24 years, Liam believed he was the center of their universe. He operated under the assumption that Richard and Brenda would sacrifice anything to shield him from consequences. He thought their favoritism was rooted in unconditional love. The audio recording exposed the sterile transactional nature of their bond. He was not loved. He was an extension of Richard's ego. And the moment that ego was threatened by homelessness and criminal charges, Liam became expendable inventory. The arrogance of the golden child evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, feral survival instinct. Liam realized he had hours before sunrise. He knew Richard intended to execute his betrayal the moment the police station opened. If Liam stayed in that house, he would be arrested, indicted, and incarcerated based on the sworn testimony of his own father. He had to run. But a fugitive requires capital. Liam crept out of his bedroom. He moved through the silent hallway, avoiding the floorboards he knew would creak. He slipped into Richard's home office. The glow of the street lamp outside illuminated the desk. Liam did not need to guess passwords. Brenda frequently asked him to log into their accounts to pay her credit card bills because she found the banking portals too complicated. He knew their digital credentials by heart. He booted up the desktop computer. He logged into the joint family banking portal. The screen displayed the remaining balance from the predatory title loan, $38,500. It was the only liquid cash keeping Richard and Brenda from immediate starvation. It was the capital they needed to buy groceries, pay the exorbitant interest on the loan, and hire a defense attorney. Liam did not hesitate. He opened a new tab and accessed a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange where he maintained a private digital wallet for his sports betting habit. I initiated a wire transfer for the entire $38,500. He authorized the transaction, bypassing the two-factor authentication prompt by retrieving the security code from Richard's synced tablet resting on the desk. The joint account balance dropped to zero. Digital theft was insufficient for a man planning to disappear across state lines. Liam needed untraceable assets. He left the office and moved like a shadow toward the master bedroom. He pushed the door open. Richard and Brenda were asleep, their breathing heavy and rhythmic. The stress of the day had pulled them into a deep, exhausted slumber. Liam crouched near Brenda's vanity table. He slid the top drawer open. He bypassed the costume pieces and extracted the authentic velvet jewelry boxes. He pocketed her diamond tennis bracelet, the sapphire anniversary earrings, and a heavy gold necklace. He moved to Richard's dresser. He took two expensive mechanical watches Richard kept in a lacquered display case. He shoved the valuables deep into the pockets of his jacket. He walked downstairs to the kitchen. He grabbed the keys to Brenda's least luxury SUV from the marble counter. He packed a single duffel bag with his remaining clothes, slung it over his shoulder, and exited through the garage access door. He did not leave a note. He started the SUV, keeping the headlights off until he reached the end of the suburban street. He merged onto the interstate, heading south toward the Oregon border. The golden child was gone, transforming into an interstate fugitive fleeing a felony fraud investigation in a stolen vehicle funded by his parents' final pennies. The sun rose over Seattle, casting a pale morning light across the city. Richard woke up in his bed, feeling a profound, unearned sense of relief. He stretched his arms, believing he had successfully negotiated a ceasefire in my apartment. He thought he had outsmarted me by offering up his son. He believed the impending foreclosure was paused, and the police investigation would neatly wrap around Liam's wrists, leaving him untainted. He put on his robe and walked downstairs to the kitchen. He brewed a pot of coffee, inhaling the rich aroma, relishing the warmth of a house he thought he had saved. He planned to walk into Liam's room, wake him up, and offer to drive him to the campus registrar to sort out the expulsion. It would be a ruse, a method to get Liam into the car so Richard could drive him directly to the police precinct and deliver his fabricated confession. Richard brought his coffee mug into the home office. He sat at his desk and woke up the computer monitor. He wanted to check the bank balance to formulate a budget for the upcoming legal fees. He logged into the joint portal. The dashboard loaded. The available balance read zero. Richard stared at the digit. He blinked, assuming the banking server was experiencing a maintenance glitch. He refreshed the browser. The zero remained. He clicked on the transaction history tab. He saw the outgoing wire transfer executed at 3:00 in the morning, funneling $38,500 into an untraceable offshore routing number. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead. His coffee mug clattered against the desk pad. He sprinted out of the office and pounded up the stairs. He threw open the door to Liam's bedroom. The bed was unmade. The closet doors were wide open, exposing empty hangers. The duffel bag was missing. Richard felt the air leave his lungs. He ran down the hallway and burst into his own master bedroom. Brenda stirred, startled by his frantic movement. Richard tore open the vanity drawers. He saw the empty velvet boxes. He checked his watch display case. The velvet cushions were bare. Brenda sat up, clutching the sheets to her chest. She asked what was happening, her voice thick with sleep and confusion. Richard ran to the window and pulled back the curtains. He looked down at the driveway. The space where Brenda parked her leased SUV was empty. "He took our money," Richard whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of total devastation. "He took the car. He took everything." Brenda scrambled out of bed and rushed to the window. She stared at the empty driveway. The reality of their situation descended upon them like a collapsing roof. They were standing in a house owned by an anonymous holding company, secured by a predatory title loan they could no longer service. They had zero liquid capital. They had zero valuable assets to pawn. The son they had worshipped, the child they had funded by sacrificing my future and my identity, had gutted at them. Liam had recognized the sinking ship and decided to strip the copper wire from the bulkheads before jumping overboard. The toxic family system had not been destroyed by external forces. It had detonated from within, fueled by the very selfishness and greed they had cultivated in their favorite son. I sat at my kitchen island in my downtown apartment. My coffee was hot. The morning news played silently on the television screen. My smartphone illuminated on the quartz surface. The screen displayed an incoming call from Brenda. The call went unanswered. A minute later, a call from Richard flashed on the screen. It also went unanswered. Over the next hour, my phone registered 14 missed calls and 9 frantic, rambling voicemails. I did not listen to them. I watched the screen light up and fade to black. The desperate silence on my end was the final nail in their coffin. They were entirely alone in the ruin they had built. But the final devastating legal blow was still making its way toward their front door. 6 months is a surprisingly brief duration to dismantle a legacy built on deceit. The foreclosure process advanced with surgical precision. Marcus ensured every filed document adhered strictly to county statutes, leaving zero room for clerical appeals. There were no dramatic courtroom battles. When a borrower breaches a silent second lien and the primary lender is notified of the default, the financial dominoes fall in a predictable sequence. Richard attempted to submit a pro se motion to stall the eviction, drafting desperate legal pleas by hand. Judges do not grant leniency to individuals facing active felony fraud investigations. The court dismissed his motion within 48 hours. Ironclad Asset Management assumed full legal ownership of the property in late October. I did not attend the final walkthrough. I hired an independent property management firm to oversee the eviction protocol. Richard and Brenda packed their remaining belongings into a rented moving truck on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. They left behind the heavy oak dining table where they had held their hostile tribunal, unable to afford the cargo fees required to transport large furniture. Their displacement was severe. They relocated to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a declining suburban complex 40 miles south of the city limits. The predatory title loan agency sued them for the unsecured deficit after the house was seized, resulting in a crushing civil judgment that drained their remaining wages. Richard is currently navigating the legal fallout of the automotive fraud, relying on an overworked public defender because his capital vanished with his son. Liam remains a fugitive. Federal authorities flagged his passport, and a warrant for interstate wire fraud sits active on his record. He is a ghost haunting whatever cheap motels accept cash, forever running from the consequences his parents trained him to ignore. The toxic alliance that once ruled my life had dissolved into isolated pockets of ruin. I now held the physical deed to the sprawling colonial house. I had zero intention of crossing that threshold ever again. The structure was a monument to manipulation, a physical archive of suffocating memories and unearned expectations. But a risk analyst views property through the lens of utility, not sentiment. I reviewed the municipal zoning maps and discovered a highly lucrative detail. The estate occupied a massive double lot situated directly adjacent to a newly approved commercial transit corridor. The residential zoning parameters had quietly shifted to mixed-use commercial earlier that year. Richard had been too self-absorbed with his fading social status to read the city planning notices mailed directly to his own address. He owned a gold mine and never realized it. I bypassed residential real estate agents entirely. I contracted a commercial broker. We listed the parcel exclusively to corporate developers looking to establish luxury retail spaces in the expanding neighborhood. A brief, highly competitive bidding war erupted between 2 regional development firms. I signed the closing documents exactly 3 weeks later. The final sale price was $1,200,000. The funds were paid in full via wire transfer directly to my holding company. I had traded an $85,000 strategic loan for a seven-figure payout. The math balanced out perfectly. The physical eradication of the structure occurred on a brisk Tuesday morning in early November. I drove to the old neighborhood one last time. I parked my car down the street, stepping out into the cold air. I held a cup of hot black coffee in my hand. The morning smelled of diesel exhaust and damp earth. A commercial demolition crew had already secured the perimeter with chain link fencing. A heavy yellow excavator idled in the exact spot on the driveway where Liam's stolen sports car had once been repossessed. I stood on the sidewalk and watched the foreman give the signal. The operator engaged the hydraulic gears. The massive steel arm raised high into the air. The heavy metal bucket swung forward and crashed directly through the roof of the master bedroom. Wood splintered. Glass shattered into 1,000 shining fragments. The sound was deafening, resonant, and incredibly beautiful. I watched the metal teeth tear down the walls of the living room where Brenda had issued her ultimatums. I watched the heavy treads crush the front porch where Richard had attempted to assert his fabricated authority. The safe in my old bedroom was buried under a pile of crushed drywall and splintered hardwood. Within 2 hours, the suburban fortress was reduced to a flat expanse of dirt and broken debris. I took a sip of my coffee. The oppressive weight I had carried for 3 decades lifted from my shoulders, dissolving into the dust clouds, settling over the empty lot. The structure that housed my torment was gone, leaving a blank canvas in its wake. The contrast between my past and my present became profoundly clear during the fourth Thursday of November. I am standing in the bright, warm kitchen of Vanessa and Marcus's home in Bellevue. The air smells of roasted turkey, sage, and caramelized sugar. The atmosphere is fundamentally different from any holiday gathering I experienced growing up. There is no tension humming beneath the floorboards. There are no passive-aggressive comments disguised as parental advice. There are no expectations measuring my worth by the size of my wallet. There is only genuine laughter echoing from the dining room. Marcus is pouring wine, his posture relaxed, free from the hostility he used to endure from my parents. Vanessa is telling a story about a patient at her pediatric clinic, her face glowing with an unburdened joy I have not seen since we were children. She is no longer the anxious peacemaker trying to balance a tilting scale. She is confident, secure, and thriving. My grandmother is sitting in a comfortable armchair near the stone fireplace. She is safe, her medical care fully funded and professionally managed. She holds a cup of herbal tea, smiling at the commotion, untroubled by the financial chaos that consumed her son. I take my seat at the long mahogany table, the same table where I once threw down a police report to expose a thief. Today, the surface is covered with fine china crystal glasses and abundant food. Nobody asks me to review their debts. Nobody expects me to fund their mistakes. Nobody looks at me as a contingency plan for their own failures. I look at the faces of the people surrounding me. This is my actual family. We are not bonded by mere biology or geographic proximity. We are bonded by mutual respect, shared integrity, and a fierce refusal to tolerate deception. We protect each other because we choose to not, because a toxic hierarchy demands it. As Marcus raises his glass to propose a holiday toast, I look out the window at the quiet, peaceful street. I realize a fundamental truth about survival and success. My worth was never defined by my capacity to endure exploitation. My value is not measured by the amount of bad debt I can carry for people who refuse to walk on their own. Real strength does not lie in propping up a rotting foundation just because you happen to share a last name with the people living inside it. True power resides in the courage to swing the wrecking ball. It lies in the ability to clear the debris, salt the earth where the lies used to grow, and build something magnificent on the empty ground. I keep a single photograph from the old property inside my office desk drawer. It is not a holiday portrait. It captures a wide angle of the freshly leveled dirt lot the morning. The excavation crew packed up their heavy machinery. The sky above the empty parcel is a clear, unobstructed gray. I look at that image whenever I need to recalibrate my baseline. Outsiders often ask if severing the biological cord leaves a lingering sting. They operate under the naive assumption that estrangement equates to a void. They fail to realize that excising a parasite does not leave you hollow. It leaves you healthy. Looking back at the wreckage, Richard, Brenda, and Liam engineered. I distilled my survival into 3 operational principles. First, you cannot cure a toxic liability with an infusion of blind loyalty. My parents treated my autonomy like an unsecured line of credit drawing from my stability to finance their golden child's reckless illusions. If you set yourself on fire, you will never keep an exploitative system warm. You only reduce your own potential to ash. When an individual views your existence merely as a bailout fund, the only viable strategy is to permanently freeze the account. Second, true leverage demands absolute silence. When you shout, weep, and beg for validation, you hand an abuser the exact emotional friction they require to control the narrative. Manipulators thrive in the fog of a screaming match. They drown under the sterile weight of documentation. I did not secure my freedom by engaging in a shouting match at a catered dinner party. I succeeded by remaining mute and allowing the notarized police reports, the forged loan contracts, and the audited banking ledgers to execute the dismantling. Hard data does not require volume to shatter a room. Third, genetics represent an anatomical coincidence, not a lifelong indentured servitude contract. Society perpetuates a dangerous fallacy that sharing a surname demands endless tolerance for extortion. Vanessa Marcus, my grandmother and I gather around a mahogany table today because we enforce a rigorous code of ethics. We earn our positions in each other's lives through mutual respect, transparent motives, and unyielding integrity. A real family is the fortress you deliberately construct on solid bedrock long after you have condemned the rotting structure you were born into. My name is Chloe Thorne. I evaluate failing structures for a living, and my most successful audit was identifying my own bloodline as an unrecoverable deficit. You do not owe your future to the people who forged your past. If you are currently quietly funding a machine that grinds you down, consider this your authorization to cut the power. Thank you for listening to my file on my revenge. If you have ever had to execute a hostile takeover of your own life to survive, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.